Hi guys, tonight we explore the deep and quiet beginnings of a civilization that would shape one of the most influential cultures in human history. You find yourself standing in the pale light of early morning somewhere on the vast Iranian plateau. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of dry earth and distant mountain wind. Around you stretches a landscape that feels both harsh and strangely peaceful. Rugged mountains rise along the horizon, like silent walls, while wide plains extend into the distance beneath a sky that seems impossibly large. This land may appear quiet now, but it once gave birth to a civilization that would shape the destiny of empires, religions, trade routes, and political systems across much of the ancient world. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in tonight, I would love to know where you are listening from. Tell me your location and your local time down in the comments. Now dim the lights and imagine yourself walking slowly across this ancient landscape. You move across a plateau that sits high above sea level, surrounded by natural barriers that once protected and isolated the people who lived here. To the west lie the Zagros Mountains, long ridges of stone that stretch for hundreds of miles. To the north stand the Alborz Mountains, whose peaks collect snow even as the plains below grow dry and warm. Between these mountain ranges spreads a vast interior land of valleys, steppe and desert basins. It is not an easy environment. Summers can be brutally hot. Winters in the mountains can bring deep cold. Rainfall is scarce in many areas. Yet it is precisely this demanding geography that helped shape the early societies of Persia. One widely accepted fact among historians is that the Iranian plateau acted as a crossroads between civilizations. To the west lay Mesopotamia, where cities like Babylon and Ur had already developed complex societies thousands of years earlier. To the east stretched Central Asia and the open grasslands where migrating peoples travelled with their herds. To the south lay the Persian Gulf, linking the region to ancient trade networks that reached as far as India. Standing here, you begin to understand how this land connected worlds. But before there was an empire called Persia, before kings ruled from magnificent capitals, this plateau was home to scattered communities that slowly adapted to the land's challenges. You imagine small groups of early farmers tending fields near seasonal rivers. Others herd goats and sheep across rolling grasslands where sparse vegetation grows after the winter rains. Their homes are simple structures of mud brick or woven materials built close to sources of water. Life here follows the rhythms of nature. In the early morning, you might hear the distant bells of grazing animals moving across open ground. By midday, the sun warms the earth until the air shimmers above the plains. At night, the sky becomes a vast ocean of stars, clearer and brighter than in many other parts of the world. Archaeologists have discovered that humans lived on this plateau for thousands of years before the rise of the Persian Empire. Settlements dating back to around 7000 BC show early farming communities growing barley and wheat, domesticating animals, and building small villages. Some of these early sites reveal surprisingly sophisticated skills. Pottery decorated with geometric patterns has been found in several ancient settlements, suggesting a culture that already valued artistic expression alongside survival. Yet historians still debate whether these early plateau societies directly influenced the later Persian identity, or whether Persia emerged from later migrating groups who brought new languages and traditions with them. As you continue walking through this imagined landscape, you begin to notice how geography quietly shapes everything. Water determines where people can live. Rivers that flow down from the mountains create narrow green corridors where crops can grow. Beyond these fertile areas lie dry deserts that can stretch for hundreds of miles. One such desert, known today as the Dasht-i-Kavir, is a vast salt desert where the ground itself can become dangerously unstable. Travellers crossing these regions in ancient times had to know secret routes between oases where water could be found. These environmental challenges forced early communities to develop resilience and adaptability. Skills like irrigation, seasonal migration, and trade became essential to survival. Some researchers suggest that this constant need to adapt may have influenced the later Persian talent for administration and organization. Governing a large empire requires understanding diverse environments and peoples, something the inhabitants of the plateau had been doing for generations. But at this early moment in history, no one here could imagine the vast empire that would eventually grow from this land. You walk across a wide plain where dry grass bends gently in the wind. In the distance, smoke rises from a small settlement where families prepare morning meals. Perhaps flatbread baking on clay ovens, or simple stews made from grains and herbs gathered nearby. Children run across the open ground while elders sit in shaded courtyards telling stories about ancestors and distant lands. These stories, passed quietly from generation to generation, will one day form the roots of a cultural memory that lasts for thousands of years. Scholars remain divided about exactly when the name Persia first began to describe the people of this region. Some believe it emerged from a particular tribe known as the Pars or Parsa, whose homeland lay in the southwestern part of the plateau. Others suggest the identity of Persia formed more gradually as various tribes and cultures blended together across centuries of migration and interaction. Either way, you're standing at the very beginning of that story. The mountains, the deserts, the valleys, and the open sky above them all quietly prepare the stage for one of history's most remarkable civilizations. In the distance, the sun climbs slowly higher, warming the stones beneath your feet. The land is still peaceful. The great empires have not yet appeared. Kings have not yet built their grand palaces, but the foundations of Persia are already here, hidden in the geography, written in the rhythms of daily life, waiting patiently for history to begin unfolding. And as the wind moves softly across the plateau, you take another slow step forward into the deep past. The morning light grows warmer as you continue your slow walk across the wide Iranian plateau. Behind you, the small farming communities of the previous centuries fade into memory, replaced by a land that feels more alive with movement. You begin to notice paths across the open ground. They are not roads in the modern sense. No stones are laid, no walls mark their edges. But the land remembers where countless feet have travelled. These are the roots of migrating peoples. For thousands of years, waves of tribes moved across the grassland stretching from Central Asia into the Iranian plateau. They travelled with animals, families, and stories carried through generations. These migrations would eventually shape the language, culture, and identity of what the world would later call Persia. One widely accepted historical fact is that around the 2nd millennium BCE, groups known as Indo-Iranian peoples began moving southward from the Eurasian steppes. These pastoral tribes likely travelled with horses, cattle, sheep, and wheeled wagons, following the seasonal grazing routes across enormous distances. You imagine the slow rhythm of their journey. Herds moving across tall grass, smoke rising from temporary camps at dusk, children riding in wagons while elders watched the horizon for storms or strangers. Their language belonged to a large family that scholars today call Indo-European, the same distant linguistic family that would eventually produce languages as varied as English, Greek, Persian, and Hindi. As these groups entered the Iranian plateau, they did not arrive in an empty land. Farming communities already lived here. Small settlements had existed for thousands of years. Trade routes connected villages with distant cultures. What followed was not necessarily conquest, but gradual interaction. Some tribes settled permanently, blending their traditions with those of the earlier inhabitants. Others remained semi-nomadic, moving between highland pastures and valley settlements depending on the season. Archaeologists continue discussing whether these migrations happened in sudden waves or through slower movements over many generations. Evidence from burial sites, pottery styles, and early languages offers clues, but the full picture remains incomplete. Still, over time, certain tribal identities begin to emerge from the mixture of peoples. Two names appear repeatedly in ancient sources: the Medes and the Persians. You picture yourself standing beside a wide valley where a small tribal encampment has been established for the season. Tents made from woven wool stand in loose circles. Horses graze nearby, their breath visible in the cool morning air. The people here live closely connected to the land. Their lives revolve around herding animals, tending small fields, and protecting their communities. At night, they gather around fires where stories travel further than any written record. Because at this point in history, writing has not yet become common among these tribes, their memories are preserved through spoken tradition. Songs, legends, and genealogies pass carefully from elders to younger generations. Some historians believe these oral traditions later inspired parts of Persian epic literature, including stories preserved thousands of years later in works like the Shahnameh. But whether those early myths truly connect to these migrating tribes is still debated. Some researchers suggest later writers may have blended ancient memories with newer political narratives. As you continue observing the camp, you notice something else important about these early societies. Their political structures are relatively simple. Tribal leaders hold authority based on reputation, wisdom, and the ability to guide their people through difficult seasons. Decisions are often made through councils where elders speak and alliances between clans are negotiated carefully. This flexible system works well for smaller communities, but it will eventually evolve into something far more powerful. The name Persian Empire itself likely originates from a particular group known as the Parsa. These people eventually settled in the southwestern region of the plateau, an area that later became known as Persis or Pars. It is from this relatively small tribal homeland that one of the greatest empires in human history will emerge. But at this moment, that future still feels distant. You walk across rolling hills where shepherds guide flocks through narrow valleys. Streams flowing from the mountains provide water for animals and crops. Villages appear occasionally along the landscape, their mud brick walls blending into the colours of the earth. Trade already exists here. Travellers bring metals, textiles, and ideas from distant lands. Through these exchanges, the people of the plateau slowly become connected to larger networks stretching across Western Asia. In some settlements, archaeologists have found early metal tools and weapons made from bronze. This suggests that technological knowledge is spreading through trade contacts with neighbouring civilizations such as Elam and Mesopotamia. Yet despite these connections, the cultures of the plateau retain their own distinct character. Some scholars suggest that the challenging environment of the region helped shape certain cultural traits often associated with early Iranian societies. Mobility, adaptability, and strong clan loyalty become important survival skills. These qualities will later influence the way Persian rulers manage large territories filled with diverse peoples. As the afternoon sun climbs higher, the sounds of daily life continue around you. Women grind grain on stone tools, children chase each other between tents, warriors practice with the ears and bows on the edge of camp. Horses remain especially important. For many Indo-Iranian groups, mastery of horses transforms travel, warfare, and communication. Mounted riders can move across the plateau far more quickly than foot travelers. Some historians believe this growing horse culture helped the early Iranian tribes expand their influence across large areas. But exactly how these tribes organized themselves into larger political groups remains uncertain. Scholars remain divided about when the Medes and Persians first began forming recognizable kingdoms. Ancient sources written centuries later describe powerful Median rulers dominating much of the plateau before the rise of Persia. Yet archaeological evidence for this early Median empire remains limited, leaving historians to piece together the story through fragments of information. Still, you can sense something slowly changing. Tribes are no longer isolated. Alliances grow stronger. Territories become more clearly defined. The seeds of political power are quietly forming across the Iranian plateau. You look across the open land once more. The migrating tribes, the scattered settlements, the horse riders moving across distant hills, all of them are part of a long transformation. A transformation that will soon produce kings powerful enough to unite these lands under a single banner. And somewhere among the Persian tribes, a child will one day be born who will turn these scattered peoples into an empire that astonishes the ancient world. But for now, the plateau remains a place of movement, stories, and possibility. The great age of Persia is approaching, even if no one living here can yet see it coming. The wind shifts gently across the plateau as the centuries continue to unfold around you. The tribal camps you observed earlier have slowly grown into something more structured. Alliances between clans become stronger, territories more clearly recognized, and leaders begin to command larger followings. You now find yourself in the southwestern region of the Iranian plateau. a land that will later be known as Persis. The landscape here feels slightly different. Rolling hills stretch across the horizon, broken by fertile valleys, where seasonal rivers flow down from the Zagros Mountains. Small fortified settlements appear along these valleys, their walls built from sun-dried brick and stone. The people living here belong to the Persian tribes, descendants of those early Indo-Iranian migrants who settled this land generations ago. And among them, history is quietly preparing one of its most important figures. Around the year 600 BCE, a child is born into the ruling family of the Persian tribe known as the Achaemenids. His name is Cyrus. At first, nothing about this moment seems extraordinary. Children are born every day in villages scattered across the plateau. But in time, this child will become Cyrus the Great, the founder of the first Persian Empire and one of the most influential rulers in ancient history. You imagine the early years of Cyrus unfolding within a world that is already politically complex. The Persian tribes do not yet rule the region. Instead, they live under the authority of another powerful group known as the Medes. The Medes control a large kingdom centered in the northwestern parts of the plateau. Their rulers command armies, collect tribute from neighboring regions, and maintain influence across much of what is now Iran. Ancient Greek historians later describe the Medes as a formidable power whose kings governed from impressive fortified cities. However, historians today continue to debating how centralized the Median kingdom truly was. Some researchers argue it may have been more of a loose alliance of powerful tribes rather than a tightly controlled empire. Regardless of the exact structure, the Persians at this time remain subordinate to Median authority. Yet change is coming. As you walk along a narrow path leading toward a Persian settlement, you begin to hear distant sounds of preparation. Warriors gather near the edge of town, blacksmiths hammer bronze and iron into weapons. Messengers arrive on horseback carrying news from distant tribes. The Persian leader at this moment is a man named Cambyses, the father of Cyrus. Though his power is limited under Median rule, he belongs to a noble lineage that claims descent from an earlier ancestor named Achaemenes. This family line will soon become the ruling dynasty of Persia. By the time Cyrus reaches adulthood, tensions between the Persians and the Medes have begun to grow. The Median king, known in Greek sources as Astyages, still holds authority over the region. But alliances between tribes are shifting. Exactly how Cyrus first rose to challenge Median power remains one of the great mysteries of ancient history. Ancient writers such as Herodotus tell dramatic stories about prophecies, secret plots and revolts among Median nobles who grew dissatisfied with their king. In one famous account, Astyages dreams that his grandson Cyrus will overthrow him, prompting attempts to eliminate the child before he grows older. Yet many modern historians question how much of this story is legend. Some scholars believe these narratives were shaped later to create a dramatic origin story for Cyrus. Archaeologists continue searching for clearer evidence about how the Persian revolt truly unfolded, but one fact remains widely accepted. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus leads a rebellion that defeats the Median king and takes control of the Median capital. You imagine the moment when Persian and Median forces finally meet on the battlefield, somewhere among the rugged valleys of the plateau. Dust rises from the movement of thousands of soldiers, spears glint under the bright sun. Riders on horseback carry orders between commanders. The outcome of this conflict will change the balance of power across the entire region. When the fighting ends, Cyrus does not destroy the Median kingdom. Instead, he absorbs it. This decision reveals one of the most remarkable aspects of Cyrus's leadership style. Rather than ruling purely through force, he chooses to integrate conquered peoples into his growing empire. Median nobles retain important positions. Their administrative experience becomes valuable to the new Persian state. This approach will later become one of the defining features of Persian imperial rule. As news of Cyrus's victory spreads across Western Asia, neighboring kingdoms begin to take notice. The young Persian ruler now controls not only the homeland of the Persians, but also the territories once ruled by the Medes. His power is expanding rapidly. You walk through a bustling settlement where traders gather in small markets. Conversations move quickly from one group to another. The name Cyrus is spoken with increasing curiosity. Some merchants see opportunity. A strong ruler can bring stability to trade routes and protect caravans travelling long distances. Others feel uncertainty. A rising power often brings war as new kings attempt to expand their territories. What makes Cyrus unusual among ancient rulers is not only his military success, but also the way he presents himself. Instead of simply declaring domination, he portrays his rule as a form of restoration and justice. Some historians point to inscriptions and later records suggesting that Cyrus emphasized fairness and respect for local traditions. This reputation would later grow so strong that some ancient writers described him as an unusually humane conqueror. One well-known artifact known today as the Cyrus Cylinder records a proclamation issued after Cyrus conquered Babylon years later. The text describes how the king restored temples and allowed displaced peoples to return to their homelands. Some modern scholars see this as an early example of political propaganda designed to win support from conquered populations. Others view it as evidence of a genuine governing philosophy that differed from many earlier empires. Archaeologists still debate exactly how revolutionary Cyrus's policies truly were, but there is little doubt that his approach helped stabilize an empire made up of many different cultures. For now, though, his story is just beginning. You stand at the edge of a growing Persian capital where administrators begin organizing newly acquired lands. Messengers arrive with reports from distant provinces. Military commanders discuss future campaigns. The once small Persian tribe has become the center of a rapidly expanding power, and Cyrus, the young king who rose from the valleys of Persis, is preparing to lead his people far beyond the borders of the Iranian plateau. Soon his armies will march toward the great civilizations of the ancient world, and Persia will begin its transformation into one of the largest empires humanity has ever known. The sun climbs slowly above the rugged hills of the Iranian plateau as the power of Cyrus continues to grow. What began as a rebellion against Median authority has now become something far greater. The Persian ruler is no longer simply a tribal king. He is the leader of a rising empire. You stand beside a caravan route that winds through a wide valley. Traders, soldiers, and messengers move steadily along the path. News travels quickly across these roads now, and the name of Cyrus has begun to spread far beyond Persia itself. The world around you is filled with powerful kingdoms. To the west lies Lydia, a wealthy state in Anatolia, ruled by King Croesus, a monarch famous throughout the ancient world for his immense riches. To the south stands Babylon, one of the most ancient and magnificent cities on earth. Its walls tower above the plains of Mesopotamia, and its temples rise like mountains of brick beneath the hot sun. For centuries, these civilizations have shaped the political landscape of the region, but now a new power is emerging from the east. One widely recognized historical fact is that after consolidating control over the former Median territories, Cyrus begins a series of campaigns that dramatically expand Persian influence. His armies move with remarkable speed across lands that had once seemed beyond the reach of any single ruler. You imagine yourself watching one of these Persian armies preparing to depart from a fortified encampment. Rows of soldiers stand ready with spears and shields. Mounted riders patrol the outer edges of the camp. Supply wagons are loaded with grain-dried meat and water containers for the long journey ahead. Unlike many earlier tribal forces, the Persian army is becoming increasingly organized. Units from different regions serve together under a single command structure. Median warriors fight beside Persians. Allied tribes contribute cavalry and archers. This growing diversity of troops will become a defining feature of Persian military strength. Historians still debate how Cyrus managed to unite such a wide range of peoples under his leadership. Some researchers believe his reputation for fair treatment helped persuade conquered communities to support him rather than resist. Others suggest that pragmatic political alliances played an equally important role. Either way, the Persian ruler begins pushing westward toward Lydia. King Croesus, hearing of Cyrus's rise, attempts to challenge the expanding empire. Ancient Greek sources describe how Croesus consulted famous oracles before launching his campaign, hoping for divine guidance. One story tells of the Oracle of Delphi delivering a mysterious prophecy claiming that if Croesus attacked Persia, a great empire would fall. What the oracle did not specify was whose empire it would be. When the armies finally meet, the conflict unfolds across the rugged landscapes of Anatolia. Dust rises from the battlefield as soldiers advance under the blazing sun. In the end, it is Cyrus who emerges victorious. Lydia falls under Persian control around 546 BCE. The capture of this kingdom brings enormous wealth and strategic advantage to the growing empire. Lydia had controlled important trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world with inland Asia. Its capital, Sardis, becomes one of the most important cities in the Persian administrative network. You walk through the markets of Sardis after the conquest. Merchants continue their business almost as before. Coins change hands, spices and textiles are traded across busy stalls. What surprises many observers is that the Persian administration allows much of the local system to remain intact. Instead of dismantling the city's economic structure, Persian officials incorporate it into their broader imperial system. This approach will become a hallmark of Persian governance. But Cyrus's ambitions do not end in Lydia. To the south, the ancient city of Babylon still stands as one of the greatest centers of power in the world. Its immense walls are said to be so wide that chariots could travel along their tops. The Euphrates River flows directly through the city, feeding canals and gardens that sustain a population of tens of thousands. Babylon represents not only military strength but also immense cultural prestige. Conquering it would transform Cyrus from a regional ruler into a monarch recognized across the entire Near East. In 539 BCE, Persian forces approach the city. You imagine yourself standing outside the enormous gates of Babylon as Persian soldiers gather along the horizon. The city appears nearly invincible. Its defences have repelled attackers for generations. Yet what happens next becomes one of the most intriguing episodes in ancient history. According to several ancient accounts, the Persians capture Babylon with surprisingly little destruction. Some sources suggest that Cyrus's forces diverted the Euphrates River, allowing troops to enter the city through previously submerged gates. Other historians question whether this dramatic story reflects the true events or whether Babylon may have surrendered with minimal resistance due to political divisions within the city. Archaeologists continue discussing these possibilities and the exact details remain uncertain. What is clear, however, is that Babylon falls under Persian control. When Cyrus enters the city, he presents himself not as a destroyer, but as a legitimate ruler chosen to restore order. The famous Cyrus Cylinder records his proclamation describing how he honoured local religious traditions and returned sacred statues to temples across the region. For many people living under Babylonian rule, this new leadership appears surprisingly respectful of their customs. The Persian Empire now stretches from Central Asia to the Mediterranean Sea. You stand on the edge of a hill overlooking a caravan route that connects distant provinces of this expanding realm. Traders from different cultures pass each other along the dusty road. Languages mix in the air. Aramaic, Persian, Babylonian, and others echo across the marketplace. The empire Cyrus has built is unlike any previous kingdom in the region. It governs diverse populations across enormous distances. It respects local traditions while maintaining central authority, and it continues to expand. Some scholars believe Cyrus's political vision helped create a stable imperial model that later empires would study and imitate. Others caution that the peaceful image of his conquests may have been shaped partly by the records left behind by his own administration. Whatever the full truth may be, one thing is undeniable. The Persian Empire has now become one of the largest and most influential powers the ancient world has ever seen, and the foundations of that empire are only just beginning to take shape. The empire around you continues to grow wider with every passing year. From the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia to the rocky highlands of Anatolia, lands that once belonged to many different rulers now recognize the authority of the Persian king. You find yourself traveling along a wide road stretching across the heart of the empire. Dust rises softly beneath your feet as caravans, messengers, soldiers, and merchants move steadily along the same path. This road is not simply a track worn by passing travellers, it is part of something far more deliberate. One of the most remarkable innovations of the Persian Empire is its vast communication network centred on what later historians will call the Royal Road. Stretching more than 2,500 kilometres from the Persian heartland to the western city of Sardis, the royal road connects distant provinces across mountains, plains, and deserts. For the first time in history, an empire this large has created a system that allows information to travel quickly between faraway regions. You imagine yourself standing beside a small relay station built along the road. It is a modest structure of stone and mud brick, but its purpose is incredibly important. Fresh horses wait inside the stable. Riders sit nearby, prepared to carry messages onward at a moment's notice. When a courier arrives from the east, exhausted after riding for hours across open terrain, he dismounts quickly. Another rider takes the sealed message and immediately sets off again toward the next station. This relay system allows royal messages to cross enormous distances in a matter of days rather than weeks. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus famously described this Persian courier network with admiration. He wrote that neither snow nor rain nor heat nor darkness of night could stop the royal messengers from completing their journeys with remarkable speed. Modern historians generally agree that this communication system was one of the key factors allowing the Persian Empire to function effectively across such vast territory. Without it, distant provinces might easily drift beyond the control of the central government. As you continue travelling along the royal road, the diversity of the empire becomes increasingly visible. Merchants from Phoenician cities carry purple-dyed textiles. Traders from Central Asia bring horses and precious stones. Babylonian scribes record transactions using clay tablets. Egyptian artisans travel westward with goods made along the Nile. The road itself becomes a meeting place for cultures from across the ancient world. Yet maintaining order along such a long route requires careful organization. The Persian rulers develop a system of provincial administration designed to manage these distant regions efficiently. The empire is divided into large territories known as satrapies. Each satrapy is governed by an official called a satrap who acts as the king's representative in that region. You arrive at the administrative center of one such province. The building is large but not overly extravagant. Inside, scribes sit at wooden tables recording taxes, shipments of goods, and military reports arriving from nearby towns. Satraps oversee local security, collect tribute, and ensure that the laws of the empire are respected. However, the Persian system also includes safeguards against corruption or rebellion. Royal inspectors, sometimes referred to in ancient sources as the king's eyes and ears, travel secretly between provinces to observe the behavior of local governors. If a satrap abuses his power or begins acting independently, these inspectors report directly to the king. Historians still debate how frequently these royal inspectors actually intervened in provincial affairs. Some scholars believe they played a crucial role in preventing local rulers from becoming too powerful. Others suggest that the system may have functioned more loosely than later writers described. Either way, the Persian administration demonstrates an impressive level of organization for its time. You pause at a caravan station where travelers gather for the evening. Fires crackle softly as meals are prepared. Stories from distant lands circulate among the group. One merchant, describes the lush riverbanks of the Nile. Another speaks of mountain passes leading into Central Asia. The empire now stretches across lands so vast that many people living within it may never see its full extent. Yet the royal road and the administrative network quietly bind these regions together. There is another innovation that helps unify this enormous territory: language. Although many languages continue to be spoken throughout the empire, the Persian administration adopts Aramaic as a common written language for official communication. Aramaic scribes become essential to the empire's bureaucracy. Their records allow officials in different regions to understand one another despite cultural differences. Some historians view this linguistic policy as one of the earliest examples of an empire adopting a practical administrative language to manage diversity. Others point out that Aramaic was already widely used in the Near East before Persian rule, making it a convenient choice rather than a new invention. As night falls along the royal road, the stars appear once again above the plateau. You sit quietly near the edge of the caravan camp, watching as riders prepare to continue their journey under moonlight. A messenger from the eastern provinces arrives with news for the royal court. Another courier departs westward, carrying instructions from the king. Across thousands of kilometers, this quiet flow of information allows the Persian ruler to remain connected to lands he may never personally visit. Some scholars argue that this communication network represents one of the earliest examples of large-scale imperial infrastructure. Without it governing such a vast realm would have been nearly impossible. But even this impressive system is only part of the Persian achievement. Beyond roads, messengers, and governors lies a deeper philosophy of rule that will shape the character of the empire itself. A philosophy that seeks not only to conquer lands, but also to manage diversity with surprising flexibility. And as the Persian Empire continues expanding, that approach will soon become one of its most powerful strengths. The morning sun rises gently over the vast lands of the Persian Empire, illuminating a world that now stretches farther than any kingdom you have seen before. From the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia to the distant mountains of Central Asia, an extraordinary variety of cultures now live under the authority of a single ruler. You walk through a busy provincial city somewhere along the empire's western frontier. Markets open slowly as merchants arrange baskets of fruit-woven fabric, spices, and pottery. The air carries the sound of many languages spoken at once. Babylonian traders negotiate prices beside Greek sailors. Jewish craftsmen work quietly in small workshops. Local farmers bring goods from surrounding villages. What makes this moment in history remarkable is that all of these people, despite their differences, are living within the same imperial system. One widely recognized historical fact about the Persian Empire is that its rulers developed an unusually flexible approach to governing diverse populations. Rather than forcing every region to abandon its traditions, Persian kings often allowed local customs, religions, and laws to continue as long as they did not threaten imperial stability. This policy would become one of the defining characteristics of Persian rule. You enter a temple courtyard where priests prepare a quiet morning ritual. The building itself follows local architectural traditions rather than Persian design. Yet the Persian administration allows these religious practices to continue without interference. Such tolerance was not common among ancient empires. Many earlier rulers had demanded that conquered peoples adopt the religion or cultural symbols of their conquerors. The Persians, however, often chose a different strategy. Instead of replacing local traditions, they incorporated them into the broader structure of the empire. Historians often point to the example of the Jewish people during this period, when Cyrus conquered Babylon in 539 BC. Many Jewish communities were living there after earlier deportations from their homeland. According to historical records preserved in both Persian inscriptions and later biblical texts, Cyrus permitted these communities to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. For many historians, this decision represents one of the earliest documented cases of a ruler allowing displaced populations to return to their homeland. However, scholars remain divided about Cyrus's true motivations. Some researchers believe his actions reflected a genuine philosophy of religious respect. Others suggest that restoring local temples and traditions was a strategic political move designed to gain loyalty from newly conquered populations. Both explanations may contain elements of truth. As you continue walking through the city's streets, you notice how Persian authority appears in subtle ways rather than overwhelming displays of power. Administrative buildings display the symbol of the king. Royal officials monitor taxation and law enforcement. But local leaders still hold many positions of influence within their communities. This balance between imperial control and local autonomy becomes one of the keys to maintaining stability across such a vast empire. You pause beside a group of scribes sitting under a shaded awning. They record shipments of grain arriving from nearby farms and calculate taxes owed to the provincial administration. The work is careful and methodical. Efficient taxation allows the empire to fund its armies, maintain roads, and support royal construction projects. But the system is designed to avoid crushing local economies. Some historians believe the Persians learned this lesson by observing earlier empires whose heavy taxation policies provoked frequent rebellions. By contrast, Persian rulers often tried to maintain a degree of economic balance that allowed provinces to prosper while still contributing resources to the imperial center. Yet despite this reputation for tolerance, Persian rule was not entirely gentle. You walk toward the edge of the city where a small garrison of imperial soldiers stands guard near the main gate. Their presence reminds everyone that behind the administrative flexibility lies the military strength of the empire. If a province rebels or refuses tribute, Persian armies can respond swiftly. Ancient records describe several occasions when revolts were suppressed with decisive force. This combination of flexibility and authority creates a unique governing model. Some modern historians describe it as a form of pragmatic imperialism. The Persians were less concerned with forcing cultural uniformity and more focused on maintaining political stability and loyalty. This approach helps explain how the empire manages to govern territories stretching across 3 continents. As afternoon light softens across the city, you notice caravans arriving from distant regions once again. Travellers from Egypt bring papyrus scrolls. Phoenician sailors carry goods from Mediterranean ports. Officials from eastern provinces arrive with reports for the satrap. Each new arrival adds another thread to the complex tapestry of the empire. Archaeologists continue discussing how deeply Persian tolerance truly extended across all regions. Some provinces appear to have enjoyed considerable autonomy, while others experienced tighter control depending on local circumstances. Still, the overall structure of Persian governance remains remarkably stable for its time. You sit quietly beside a fountain in the central square as the city gradually settles into evening. Children chase each other through narrow streets. Merchants close their shops for the night. Temple bells ring softly in the distance. All around you, life continues with a sense of normal rhythm, and that may be the most impressive achievement of the Persian Empire. Despite ruling an enormous territory filled with different languages, beliefs, and cultures, it manages to create a system where daily life can continue without constant upheaval. This delicate balance of power tolerance and organization allows the empire to flourish for generations. But beneath the calm surface of imperial stability, deeper cultural forces are also shaping Persian identity. Beliefs about morality, cosmic order, and the struggle between truth and chaos are beginning to influence the worldview of the people living here. Soon these ideas will emerge more clearly through one of the most important spiritual traditions to ever rise from the Iranian plateau. A belief system that will shape Persian culture for centuries and quietly influence religious thought far beyond its homeland. The evening air cools gently as you leave the busy provincial city behind. The sounds of markets and caravan bells fade into the distance, replaced by a quieter landscape where the mountains rise once again along the horizon. You follow a narrow path leading toward a small stone structure standing on a hill above the valley. At first, it appears simple, almost modest, compared to the grand temples of Babylon or the towering monuments of Egypt. But as you approach, you notice something remarkable. Inside the building, a sacred fire burns steadily in a bronze vessel. Its flame flickers softly, casting warm light against the stone walls. Priests dressed in white garments tend carefully to the fire, adding small pieces of dry wood so that the flame never fades. This is a fire temple, one of the sacred spaces associated with the religious tradition that would deeply influence Persian culture. The belief system is known today as Zoroastrianism. One widely recognized historical fact is that Zoroastrianism is among the world's oldest known organized religions. It likely emerged somewhere on the Iranian plateau long before the rise of the Persian Empire, although exactly when it began remains uncertain. At the center of this faith stands a prophetic figure known as Zarathustra, called Zoroaster in later Greek writings. According to tradition, Zarathustra lived many centuries before the Persian Empire reached its height. Some ancient sources suggest he may have lived as early as 1500 BCE, while other scholars believe he lived closer to the time of the early Persian kings. Historians remain divided about his exact lifetime, largely because written records from that early period are extremely limited. But the ideas associated with his teachings became deeply influential. You step quietly into the temple courtyard, where priests chant softly in a language older than many of the languages spoken across the empire today. Their words come from sacred texts known as the Avesta, a collection of hymns and teachings preserved through generations of careful recitation. At the heart of Zoroastrian belief lies a powerful moral vision of the universe. The religion teaches that the world is shaped by an ongoing struggle between two opposing forces. One represents truth, order, and light. The other represents chaos, deception, and destruction. The god associated with truth and wisdom is known as Ahura Mazda, often described as the supreme creator of the universe. Followers of the faith believe that human beings play an important role in this cosmic struggle. Through their choices and actions, individuals help strengthen either truth or falsehood in the world. You listen as one of the priests explains this idea to a group of visitors gathered in the courtyard. He speaks calmly about the importance of living according to 3 guiding principles: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. These simple ideas form the moral foundation of Zoroastrian ethics. For many historians, this emphasis on personal moral responsibility represents one of the most distinctive features of the religion. Unlike earlier belief systems focused mainly on ritual offerings to many different gods, Zoroastrianism places strong emphasis on ethical behavior and the individual's role in maintaining cosmic order. Some scholars even suggest that these ideas may have influenced later religious traditions, including certain concepts found in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. However, researchers continue debating how direct that influence may have been. Religious ideas often evolve gradually across cultures, making it difficult to trace precise lines of transmission between belief systems. Still, the philosophical depth of Zoroastrian thought remains striking. You walk toward the inner chamber of the temple where the sacred fire burns continuously. Fire holds special symbolic importance within the religion. It represents purity, truth, and the presence of divine light. But contrary to a common misunderstanding, Zoroastrians do not worship fire itself. Instead, the flame serves as a visible reminder of the divine order that followers believe governs the universe. The careful tending of these fires becomes an important religious duty. In larger temples, priests maintain sacred flames that can burn for generations without being extinguished. You imagine how this constant fire might appear to travelers approaching the temple at night, its glow visible from far across the dark plateau. Yet Zoroastrian practice extends far beyond temples. Its influence reaches into daily life. Many followers perform simple rituals each day, offering prayers at sunrise, midday, and sunset. These moments connect individuals to the rhythms of the natural world and the cosmic struggle between order and chaos. The religion also places strong emphasis on purity. Special care is taken to keep water, earth, and fire free from contamination. Because of this belief, traditional Zoroastrian burial practices avoid placing bodies directly into the ground or fire. Instead, the deceased are often placed in structures known as towers of silence, where natural elements return the body to the earth in a way that preserves ritual purity. Archaeologists have discovered remnants of such structures across parts of the Iranian plateau and Central Asia, providing physical evidence of these ancient customs. As the night deepens around the temple, the priests continue their quiet chants. You sit near the courtyard wall and watch the flame flicker against the darkness. It becomes clear that Zoroastrianism is more than simply a religious tradition. It helps shape the moral worldview of Persian society. Ideas about truth, justice, and righteous leadership become closely connected to the authority of Persian kings. Many rulers of the empire present themselves as defenders of order against chaos, echoing the spiritual themes of the faith. Yet historians continue discussing exactly how strongly Persian rulers themselves followed Zoroastrian practices. Some inscriptions suggest deep devotion to Ahura Mazda, while other evidence indicates that Persian kings allowed considerable religious diversity within the empire. Perhaps this flexibility reflects the same pragmatic spirit that guided Persian governance in other areas. Either way, the spiritual landscape of Persia now holds ideas that will echo far beyond the empire itself. The sacred fire continues burning quietly. The stars stretch across the sky above the plateau. And somewhere beyond the horizon, new challenges are already forming that will test the strength of the Persian Empire. For even as Persia grows powerful, other civilizations are beginning to notice its rise. Across the waters of the Aegean Sea, small but fiercely independent Greek cities are watching carefully. Soon the worlds of Persia and Greece will collide in a series of conflicts that will shape how both civilizations remember themselves for centuries to come. But tonight, in the quiet glow of the fire temple, the empire still feels calm and enduring. Its spiritual foundations burn steadily, like the flame that never fades. The wind from the western mountains carries a cooler scent tonight, and as you leave the quiet fire temple behind, the vast Persian Empire continues unfolding around you. For many years, the empire has expanded steadily across Asia. Cyrus built its foundation, and after his death, his successors continued strengthening Persian power. Roads now connect distant provinces. Administrators manage enormous territories. Armies stand ready to defend imperial borders. But now you travel toward the western edge of the empire where another world begins. Across the blue waters of the Aegean Sea lie the lands of the Greeks. Unlike Persia, Greece is not a single unified kingdom. Instead, it is made up of many small city-states scattered across rugged hills and islands. Each city governs itself with its own tradition, leaders, and rivalries. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and many others compete constantly for influence. From the perspective of the Persian Empire, these scattered cities appear small and divided. Yet their fierce independence will soon draw them into one of the most famous confrontations of the ancient world. The origins of this conflict begin along the western coast of Anatolia, in a region known as Ionia. You arrive in one of these Ionian cities where narrow streets wind between white stone buildings overlooking the sea. Greek merchants fill the harbour with ships carrying olive oil, wine, and pottery to distant markets. Although these cities share Greek culture and language, they currently live under Persian rule. After Cyrus conquered Lydia decades earlier, the Ionian cities became part of the Persian Empire. Persian satraps oversee the region while local Greek leaders continue managing daily affairs. For a time, this arrangement functions relatively smoothly, but around 499 BCE tensions begin to rise. Some Greek leaders in Ionia grow dissatisfied with Persian authority. They resent paying tribute and answering to governors appointed from distant lands. Inspired partly by internal rivalries and political ambitions, several Ionian cities launch a rebellion against Persian rule. You walk through the harbour of Miletus as whispers of revolt spread through the crowd. Ships are being prepared for war. Messengers rush between city leaders carrying urgent news. The rebels seek help from mainland Greece and two cities respond. Athens and Eretria send ships to support the uprising. For the Persian king, this involvement from mainland Greek cities transforms a regional revolt into a direct challenge to imperial authority. One widely accepted historical fact is that the Ionian revolt is eventually crushed by Persian forces after several years of conflict. The rebellious cities are subdued, and Miletus suffers heavy destruction as punishment for its role in the uprising. But the rebellion leaves a lasting mark. The Persian ruler now views Athens and Eretria as hostile powers that interfered in imperial territory. Historians continue discussing whether Persian leaders originally planned a full invasion of mainland Greece, or whether the later campaigns were primarily intended as punitive expeditions. Whatever the exact intention, the stage is now set for a series of confrontations that will become legendary in Western historical memory. You travel with a Persian army moving toward the Aegean coast. The forces are impressive in their scale. Archers, infantry, cavalry, and supply wagons stretch across the plain. Soldiers from many regions march together under the banners of the empire. Some come from Persia itself, others from Media Egypt, Babylon, and distant eastern provinces. This diversity reflects the vast reach of the empire. In 490 BCE, Persian forces cross the sea toward Greece and land near a small coastal plain called Marathon. You stand on the hills overlooking the battlefield as two very different worlds prepare to meet. The Persian army represents one of the largest imperial forces ever assembled in the region. Facing them are the soldiers of Athens and their allies, far fewer in number, but fiercely determined to defend their city. What happens next becomes one of the most famous battles in ancient history. Against many expectations, the Athenian forces managed to defeat the Persian army at Marathon. The victory shocks much of the ancient world. Some historians suggest the Persians may have underestimated the determination and tactics of the Greek hoplite soldiers who fought in tightly packed formations using heavy shields and spears. Others argue that the Persian expedition was relatively small and not intended as a full-scale conquest of Greece. Scholars remain divided about the strategic goals of this campaign. But one thing is certain, the Battle of Marathon does not end the conflict. Instead, it deepens the rivalry between Persia and the Greek world. You leave the battlefield and continue travelling through time as preparations for another much larger confrontation begin. 10 years later, a new Persian king named Xerxes organises a massive campaign aimed at bringing Greece under imperial control. Bridges are constructed across the Hellespont to allow armies to cross from Asia into Europe. Supply networks are arranged across enormous distances. Ancient writers describe an army so large that its movement darkens the roads for miles. Historians today believe these numbers were exaggerated, but there is little doubt that Xerxes assembled one of the largest military expeditions of the ancient world. As the army advances into Greece, several dramatic battles unfold. At Thermopylae, a small Greek force led by Spartan warriors makes a famous last stand in a narrow mountain pass. Later at the naval battle of Salamis, Greek fleets defeat the Persian navy in the narrow waters near Athens. These victories eventually forced Xerxes to withdraw much of his army from Greece. For many Greek writers who recorded these events later, the wars became a defining story of freedom resisting imperial domination. But from the Persian perspective, these campaigns were only one chapter in a much larger imperial history. The Persian Empire remains vast and powerful despite the setbacks in Greece. Its cities continue thriving, its roads continue carrying messages across continents, and its cultural influence continues shaping the ancient world in ways that extend far beyond the battlefield. You stand once again at the western frontier of the empire, watching ships move slowly across the sea. The encounter between Persia and Greece has changed how both civilizations see themselves, and yet the story of Persia itself is far from finished. Deep within the empire, magnificent cities are rising that will display the full grandeur of Persian power. Among them stands a ceremonial capital unlike anything the ancient world has ever seen. A place built not only for administration but for spectacle, ritual and imperial identity. A city carved from stone terraces beneath the mountains. A city called Persepolis. The road rises gradually as you travel southeast across the Persian heartland. The air grows drier and the mountains of the Zagros begin to stand taller along the horizon. Dust swirls softly around the hooves of passing horses and the wheels of slow-moving carts. Ahead of you, something extraordinary begins to appear. At first, it looks like a cliff rising from the plain, but as you draw closer, the shapes become clearer. Massive stone platforms have been carved and raised high above the surrounding ground. Stairways stretch upward in long, elegant lines. Columns rise like forests of carved stone. You have arrived at Persepolis. This city, whose name later Greek writers will popularize, stands as one of the most remarkable architectural achievements of the Persian Empire. It is not a crowded commercial city like Babylon, or a military stronghold filled with soldiers. Instead, Persepolis serves a different purpose. It is a ceremonial capital. One widely accepted historical fact is that construction of Persepolis began during the reign of King Darius I, around 518 BCE. Darius, who came to power after the death of Cyrus's son Cambyses, sought to create a monumental centre that would reflect the unity and strength of the empire. You stand at the base of the enormous terrace upon which the complex is built. The stone blocks forming its walls are immense, carefully fitted together with remarkable precision. Archaeologists have long been impressed by the engineering required to build such a structure in this rugged landscape. Some scholars believe the terrace itself symbolized the elevation of royal authority above the ordinary world. Climbing the broad stairway, you notice something unusual. The steps are wide but shallow, designed in a way that allows large groups of people to ascend comfortably side by side. This design was not intended for hurried soldiers or heavy traffic. It was meant for ceremonial processions. You imagine ambassadors from distant lands slowly walking up these steps, bringing tribute to the Persian king. As you reach the top of the terrace, the scale of Persepolis becomes even more striking. Tall columns support vast halls whose roofs once rose high above the courtyard. The most impressive of these structures is the Apadana, the great audience hall where the king would receive delegations from across the empire. Though many of the roofs and wooden beams have long since disappeared, the surviving columns still hint at the building's former grandeur. Each column stands nearly 20 meters tall, topped with elaborate capitals, shaped like animals such as bulls or lions. But perhaps the most fascinating features of Persepolis are the stone reliefs carved along the staircases and walls. You walk slowly along one of these carved panels. The figures depicted here are not scenes of battle or conquest. Instead, they show representatives from many different regions of the empire bringing gifts to the king. There are Egyptians carrying fine linen, Babylonians holding decorated vessel, Lydians presenting precious metal bowls. Men from Central Asia lead horses with decorated harnesses. Each group is carved with careful attention to clothing, hairstyles and objects from their homeland. These reliefs create a visual map of the empire's diversity. Historians often interpret these images as symbolic representations of imperial harmony. They show different cultures approaching the king peacefully acknowledging his authority while maintaining their distinct identities. However, scholars remain divided about how accurately these scenes reflect reality. Some researchers believe the reliefs were idealized images meant to promote the idea of unity within the empire. Others argue that tribute ceremonies like these likely did occur during important festivals such as Nowruz, the Persian New Year celebration. During these occasions, delegations from across the empire may indeed have gathered at Persepolis to honour the king and renew their loyalty. You move through the complex towards another impressive gateway known as the Gate of All Nations. Huge stone figures guard the entrance. These creatures have the bodies of bulls or lions, wings like great birds, and human faces wearing royal crowns. Their appearance blends artistic influences from several ancient cultures including Mesopotamian traditions. Such imagery reflects the cosmopolitan nature of the Persian Empire. Artists, craftsmen and builders from many regions work together to construct Persepolis. Archaeologists have discovered inscriptions recording the wages paid to workers from different parts of the empire, suggesting that labour here was organised on a large administrative scale. One unusual detail uncovered by researchers is that these records sometimes mention women working in administrative roles and receiving rations for their labour. This has led some historians to suggest that women may have held more visible economic roles in certain parts of Persian society than previously assumed. Still, many aspects of daily life in Persepolis remain uncertain. Scholars continue discussing how often the Persian kings actually resided here. Some believe Persepolis functioned mainly as a ceremonial centre used during specific festivals rather than as a permanent royal residence. Other administrative capitals such as Susa and Babylon may have handled much of the empire's daily governance. As the sun begins to set behind the mountains, the stone columns of Persepolis glow softly in golden light. You walk through the quiet courtyards, imagining how this place once looked when the empire stood at its height. Musicians playing during grand ceremonies, delegations arriving from distant lands, royal guards standing silently beside towering gateways. For generations, Persepolis served as a powerful symbol of Persian unity and imperial authority. But even the most magnificent monuments cannot escape the turning of history. Far beyond the mountains and deserts surrounding the city, a new force is rising. A young Macedonian king named Alexander is beginning a campaign that will eventually challenge the Persian Empire itself. His armies are still far away. For now, Persepolis stands peaceful beneath the evening sky. Its stone terraces hold the memory of an empire at the peak of its power. Yet the next chapter of Persia's story will bring dramatic change. Soon the world that built this city will face one of the greatest conquerors in history. The evening quiet that once surrounded Persepolis slowly fades as the centuries move forward. The great stone terraces remain standing beneath the Zagros Mountains, but the empire that built them is beginning to face pressures it has never experienced before. You walk through the grand courtyards, once again imagining the many kings who ruled here after Cyrus the Great. Darius strengthened the empire's administration. Xerxes expanded its monumental architecture and led vast military campaigns. Later rulers continued governing territories that stretched across enormous distances. For nearly 200 years, the Achaemenid Empire remained one of the most powerful political systems the world had ever known. Yet even strong empires face gradual challenges. By the 4th century BCE, internal tensions have begun to grow within Persian territory. Rivalries among royal family members occasionally lead to struggles for the throne. Some provincial governors gained significant influence in their own regions, making imperial control more complicated. Historians often debate how serious these internal problems truly were. Some scholars believe the Persian Empire remained relatively stable until the moment a powerful external force arrived. Others argue that administrative strain and political competition had already weakened parts of the imperial structure. Either way, a dramatic new figure soon appears on the western edge of the empire. His name is Alexander. You travel westward across Anatolia toward the lands of Macedonia, where this young king begins preparing one of the most ambitious military campaigns in ancient history. Alexander inherits the throne of Macedonia in 336 BCE. after the death of his father, King Philip II. Philip had already begun strengthening Macedonian military power and forming alliances among Greek city-states. Alexander, however, intends to go even further. He announces a bold goal to invade the Persian Empire itself. For many observers at the time, this idea seems almost impossible. Persia remains vast, wealthy and powerful. Its armies have ruled enormous territories for generations. Yet Alexander in 334 BC CE, his forces cross the narrow waters of the Hellespont and enter Asia Minor. You stand among the soldiers gathered along the shoreline as ships carry Macedonian troops toward the Persian frontier. The army is relatively small compared to the massive forces once commanded by Persian kings, but it is highly disciplined and led by an ambitious young commander determined to achieve glory. One widely accepted historical fact is that Alexander's army wins its first major victory against Persian forces at the Battle of the Granicus River. The battle takes place along a fast-flowing river in western Anatolia. Persian cavalry attempt to block the Macedonian crossing, but Alexander personally leads a charge that breaks through their lines. The victory opens the path deeper into Persian territory. City after city begins falling under Macedonian control. You travel with the advancing army through Anatolia, where Greek-speaking cities often welcome Alexander as a liberator from Persian rule. In other places, resistance is stronger and fighting becomes more intense. As news of these defeats spreads eastward, the Persian king at this time, Darius III, begins assembling a massive army to confront the invasion. The two rulers finally meet in battle near a place called Assus in 333 BCE. You imagine the tension across the battlefield as the forces of two great worlds prepare to collide. The Persian army likely outnumbers Alexander's troops significantly, yet the narrow terrain of the battlefield limits how effectively the larger Persian force can maneuver. Alexander once again leads a bold cavalry attack aimed directly at the Persian king's position. During the chaos of battle, Darius's chariot retreats from the field. Ancient accounts describe this moment dramatically, suggesting that the king fled while his army was still fighting. However, historians continue debating the accuracy of these reports. Some researchers believe later Greek writers may have exaggerated the story to enhance Alexander's reputation. Still, the outcome of the battle is clear. The Persian forces withdraw and Alexander continues his advance. You follow the Macedonian army southward along the Mediterranean coast. Cities such as Tyre and Gaza fall after difficult sieges. Egypt soon accepts Alexander's rule and he is proclaimed as a pharaoh there. Yet the final confrontation with the Persian Empire is still ahead. In 331 BCE, the two armies meet once again on the wide plains near a place called Gaugamela. This battlefield offers open terrain where the Persian army can deploy its full strength. War chariots, cavalry units, and large infantry formations spread across the plain. You stand on a distant hill watching the massive armies forming lines beneath the rising sun. Darius commands one of the largest forces assembled in the ancient world. Alexander leads a smaller but highly coordinated army. When the battle begins, the fighting spreads across the vast field. Dust rises into the air as chariots race forward and cavalry units clash. Once again, Alexander directs a decisive attack toward the center of the Persian line. At a crucial moment, the Persian formation breaks. Darius withdraws from the battlefield, and the organized resistance of the Achaemenid Empire begins to collapse. In the months that follow, Alexander's forces capture several of the empire's greatest cities, Babylon, Susa, and eventually Persepolis itself. You return to the great ceremonial capital where the stone terraces once symbolized the unity of the Persian world. But this time the atmosphere feels different. The Macedonian army enters the city in triumph. Ancient sources describe a great fair eventually spreads through parts of the palace complex. Some historians believe the burning of Persepolis was a deliberate act meant to symbolize the end of Persian rule. Others argue that the fire may have begun accidentally during celebrations after the city's capture. Archaeologists continue studying the remains of the site, searching for clues about how the destruction unfolded. Whatever the exact cause, the fire marks the symbolic end of the Achaemenid Empire. The great dynasty founded by Cyrus has fallen, yet Persia itself does not disappear. The land, the culture, and the people who shaped this remarkable civilization remain. And as the centuries continue moving forward, new rulers will attempt to control the lands once governed by the Persian kings. But the spirit of Persia will continue influencing the region in ways that even Alexander could not fully erase. The smoke from Persepolis has long since faded into memory, but the land of Persia remains very much alive. You walk through the same valleys and plateaus where the Achaemenid kings once ruled, yet the banners flying above the cities are now different. The empire built by Cyrus has fallen. In its place, a new order begins to emerge under the rule of Alexander and the Macedonian elite who followed him into Asia. At first, Alexander himself appears eager to blend the worlds of Greece and Persia together. You imagine the young conqueror standing in the palace halls of Babylon wearing elements of Persian royal dress, while still surrounded by Macedonian commanders. He keeps many Persian administrators in place. He encourages marriages between Macedonian officers and Persian noble families. He even adopts certain Persian court rituals that had once defined the authority of the Achaemenid kings. Some historians see these actions as evidence that Alexander hoped to build a unified empire combining Greek and Persian traditions. Others suggest his policies were mainly practical decisions designed to maintain stability across the enormous territories he had conquered. But Alexander's story, the dream of a blended empire does not last long. In 323 BCE, only a few years after conquering Persia, he dies suddenly in Babylon at the age of 32. His empire, stretching from Greece to India, has no clear successor. What follows is a long period of struggle among his general men, later known as the Diadochi, or successors. You travel forward through years of shifting alliances and battles as these commanders fight for control over different parts of Alexander's former empire. Eventually, one general named Seleucus gains authority over much of the eastern territories, including Persia. Thus begins the Seleucid Empire. You arrive in a newly founded city where Greek-style buildings rise beside older Persian structures. Wide streets are laid out in a grid pattern common in Hellenistic urban planning. Statues of Greek gods appear in public squares, yet nearby markets still sell Persian textiles, local pottery, and foods familiar to the people of the plateau. This mixture of cultures becomes one of the defining features of the Seleucid period. One widely accepted historical fact is that the Seleucid rulers attempted to spread Greek culture throughout their territories, a process historians call Hellenization. Greek language becomes widely used in administration and trade. New cities are established where Greek settlers live alongside local populations. Greek theatre, philosophy, and art begin influencing the cultural life of many regions. However, the influence of Persian traditions does not disappear. You walk through a village where farmers continue using irrigation methods developed long before the arrival of Greek rule. Local religious practices remain active in temples across the countryside. Many people living in Persia continue speaking their native languages and following customs passed down from earlier generations. Historians still debate how deeply Hellenization affected everyday life in Persian regions. Some scholars argue that Greek cultural influence remained largely limited to urban centers and ruling elites. Others believe that over time, Greek ideas blended more deeply with local traditions, creating hybrid cultural identities across parts of the empire. Archaeological discoveries provide clues but not complete answers. In some cities, inscriptions appear in both Greek and local languages. Art styles sometimes combine Greek artistic techniques with Persian themes. This cultural blending produces a fascinating mixture that reflects the complexity of life after the fall of the Achaemenid Empire. Yet the Seleucid rulers face serious challenges in maintaining control over their enormous territories. You stand in the courtyard of a provincial administrative centre, where officials discuss reports arriving from distant regions. Rebellions occasionally break out in remote provinces, local leaders seek greater autonomy, and the vast distances between cities make communication difficult despite the administrative systems inherited from the Persians. Some historians argue that the Seleucid rulers struggled to govern effectively because their empire lacked the deeply rooted legitimacy that earlier Persian kings had built over generations. To many local populations, the Seleucids appear as foreign rulers whose authority depends heavily on military power. Meanwhile, new political forces are beginning to rise within the eastern regions of the former Persian Empire. Far beyond the western capitals, tribal groups and regional leaders begin asserting greater independence. One such group originates from the northeastern frontiers of the Iranian world. They are known as the Parthians. At first, the Parthians are relatively small in number, living among the vast landscapes east of the Caspian Sea. But over time, they will grow strong enough to challenge Seleucid authority. As you continue your journey across Persia, signs of change appear everywhere. Greek-style cities flourish in some areas. In others, older Persian traditions quietly endure. Caravans continue traveling along trade routes linking Central Asia with the Mediterranean world. Markets remain full of goods from distant lands. Despite the political upheaval that followed Alexander's conquest, daily life continues across the plateau. Farmers tend their fields. Merchants negotiate prices. Priests maintain sacred fires in temples that survived the fall of the old empire. The Persian cultural identity, shaped by centuries of history, proves remarkably resilient. Even under foreign rulers, the memory of the great Persian past remains alive among the people. Stories of Cyrus and Darius are still told to us as the wolves told. The ruins of Persepolis stand as silent reminders of an empire that once ruled much of the known world. And slowly beyond the eastern horizons of the plateau, a new Persian power begins gathering strength. A power that will soon challenge the Greek dynasties and restore Iranian rule across the region once more. The land of Persia remains vast and restless as the centuries continue to unfold. Greek-ruled cities stand beside ancient villages that still remember the age of the Achaemenid kings. Markets remain busy, trade caravans cross deserts and mountains, and cultures mingle across the wide plateau. Yet far to the northeast, beyond the familiar valleys of Persia, a quiet transformation is beginning. You travel across the dry grasslands east of the Caspian Sea, where the land stretches wide beneath an enormous sky. Here scattered tribes move with their herds across open terrain, much like the Indo-Iranian migrants who once entered the plateau many centuries earlier. Among these tribes are the Parthians. At first, they are not a large or powerful people. They belong to a group known as the Pani nomadic horse-riding clans who live along the edges of the Iranian world. Their lifestyle revolves around mobility, survival, and skill with horses and bows. You watch a group of Parthian riders crossing the steppe at sunset. Their horses move quickly across the open land, and each rider carries a bow designed for use while riding at full speed. This skill will soon become their greatest advantage. One widely recognized historical fact is that around the middle of the 3rd century BC, a Parthian leader named Arsaces leads a revolt against Seleucid authority in the northeastern region of Parthia. Taking advantage of internal struggles within the Seleucid Empire, Arsaces and his followers gradually seize control of the territory. This moment marks the beginning of what historians call the Parthian Empire. At first, the Parthian kingdom remains relatively small. The Seleucid rulers still control much of the western Iranian plateau. Greek-style cities continue operating under their authority. But the Parthians are patient. You travel with a caravan moving along the eastern trade routes. Merchants whisper about the rising strength of these horse-riding warriors. Some travelers speak of their ability to strike quickly and vanish back into the steppe before enemies can respond. The Parthians excel at a style of warfare that confuses their opponents. Mounted archers gallop across the battlefield firing arrows while retreating. This maneuver becomes so famous that later writers will describe it as the Parthian shot, a tactic where riders turn backward while riding away to fire at pursuing enemies. Against slower infantry armies, this strategy proves devastating. Historians continued debating how rapidly the Parthians expanded during their early years. Some ancient sources suggest their rise happened surprisingly quickly as Seleucid control weakened across the region. Others believe their growth was more gradual, taking several generations before they truly replaced Seleucid authority. Archaeological evidence suggests a slow process of consolidation as Parthian leaders established control over cities and trade routes. But by the 2nd century BCE, the balance of power across Persia begins shifting noticeably. You arrive at a fortified town where Parthian banners now fly above the walls. Inside, life continues much as it always has. Farmers bring goods into the market. Traders exchange textiles and spices from distant regions. Yet the rulers have changed. Instead of Greek-speaking governors sent from distant capitals, the leaders here now come from Iranian noble families aligned with the Parthian dynasty. The Parthian kings claim descent from their founding leader Arsaces. Over time, the ruling family becomes known as the Arsacid dynasty. Unlike the centralized structure of the earlier Persian Empire, Parthian rule operates more like a loose confederation. Local noble families have maintained significant power within their regions. The king acts as the supreme authority, but cooperation between aristocratic clans remains essential for maintaining stability. Some historians view this system as both a strength and a weakness. On one hand, it allows regional leaders to maintain loyalty by preserving local traditions. On the other hand, strong noble families sometimes challenge the authority of the king, leading to internal struggles within the empire. As you walk through the growing Parthian capital at Hekatompolis, the atmosphere feels different from the carefully planned cities of the Greek world. Buildings here follow a mixture of architectural styles. Some reflect older Persian traditions, others show influences from Greek and Central Asian cultures. The Parthian Empire becomes a cultural bridge between many different worlds, and perhaps nowhere was this more visible than along the great trade networks that begin flourishing during this period. Caravans arrive from the east carrying silk from China. Others bring spices and precious stones from India. Merchants from the Mediterranean world travel eastward seeking exotic goods. These routes eventually become known collectively as the Silk Roads. You stand beside a caravan station where traders from distant lands share stories while resting their animals. Languages from many cultures echo across the courtyard: Greek, Persian, Aramaic, and others from Central Asia. Persia once again becomes a crossroads of civilizations. Some historians argue that the Parthian Empire played a crucial role in connecting East and West through these expanding trade networks. Others caution that the Silk Roads were not controlled by any single empire, but rather formed through cooperation and competition among many regions. Still, there is little doubt that Parthian territory occupies a central position within this growing system of long-distance exchange. As the sun begins to set over the plateau, you reflect on how history has turned once again. The Greek dynasties that followed Alexander are gradually losing their hold over the eastern lands. In their place, a new Iranian power has emerged. The Parthians do not attempt to recreate the exact structure of the old Achaemenid Empire, but they restore something equally important: Persian leadership over the Iranian world. And with that restoration comes a renewed sense that the ancient traditions of the plateau are far from finished. The story of Persia is continuing, only now it moves forward under the banners of the Parthian kings. The caravan bells ring softly in the early morning as traders begin preparing for another long journey. You stand beside a dusty courtyard where camels kneel patiently, their packs filled with goods from distant lands. The Parthian Empire now stretches across much of the Iranian plateau, and its position between great civilizations has turned it into one of the most important crossroads in the ancient world. Merchants arrive here from directions that once seemed unimaginably far apart. From the east come traders carrying bolts of shimmering silk from China. From the south arrive spices, ivory, and precious stones brought from India. From the west come Roman glassware, wine, and finely worked metal goods. All of these goods pass through the lands controlled by the Parthians. One widely recognized historical fact is that during the Parthian period, long-distance trade across Eurasia expanded dramatically. What later historians would call the Silk Roads became a network of caravan routes linking East Asia with the Mediterranean world. These were not single roads, but rather a series of paths crossing deserts, mountains, and valleys. You begin walking along one of these routes as the caravan departs. The journey moves slowly across the plateau. Camels sway gently with each step, their long legs carrying heavy loads across terrain where wheeled vehicles would struggle to travel. Traders wrap cloth around their faces to protect against dust carried by the wind. At night they gather around small fires, sharing food and stories beneath the immense sky. The caravan stops occasionally at fortified stations known as caravanserais. These roadside inns provide shelter, water, and safety for travellers crossing dangerous terrain. Some historians believe that early forms of these caravan stations may have existed even during earlier Persian empires, but under the Parthians such trade infrastructure becomes increasingly important as commerce grows. You arrive at one of these caravanserais built beside a small oasis. High walls protect the courtyard from bandits who might otherwise attack the merchants carrying valuable cargo. Inside, animals drink from stone troughs while traders negotiate deals that will shape markets thousands of kilometers away. A Roman merchant examines a piece of Chinese silk, marveling at its lightness and texture. Nearby, a Persian trader offers spices from India to a group of buyers traveling towards Syria. The goods exchanged here will eventually reach markets as far away as Rome. Yet the traders themselves rarely travel the full distance. Instead, goods move through many hands along the route. Chinese merchants may sell silk to Central Asian intermediaries. These traders pass the goods to Parthian merchants. Finally, Roman buyers purchase them in markets along the Mediterranean coast. This chain of exchanges helps explain why many people in the Roman world once believed silk came from mysterious lands somewhere beyond Persia. Scholars still debate how much direct contact existed between the Roman and Chinese empires during this period. Some ancient texts describe occasional diplomatic missions attempting to establish communication between the two distant powers, but the vast distances and political barriers made regular contact extremely difficult. Instead, Persia and the Parthian Empire function as the essential middle ground connecting east and west. This position brings enormous economic benefits. You walk through a bustling Parthian market where foreign goods fill the stalls. Silk fabric shimmer beside Roman jewellery. Glass vessels imported from the Mediterranean reflect sunlight across the stone pavement. Precious stones from India sparkle beside local Persian metalwork. Taxes collected from trade passing through the empire provide important revenue for Parthian rulers. Caravans crossing Parthian territory must pay duties at various checkpoints along the route. These taxes help fund the armies that protect trade routes and maintain stability across the empire. However, historians continue discussing exactly how tightly the Parthian government controlled these trade networks. Some scholars believe local merchants and noble families managed much of the trade independently. Others argue that the Parthian kings actively encouraged commerce and protected caravan routes to strengthen their economy. The truth may lie somewhere between these interpretations. As you continue travelling with the caravan, the landscape gradually shifts. Dry plains give way to rocky hills and distant mountain passes appear ahead. These natural barriers create both opportunities and dangers for travellers. Bandits sometimes hide along remote stretches of road. Sudden storms can trap caravans in narrow valleys. Yet despite these challenges, the steady flow of trade continues year after year, because the rewards are immense. One particularly fascinating detail uncovered by historians involves the spread of ideas along these routes. Merchants do not carry only goods, they also carry stories, beliefs, technologies, and knowledge. Religious traditions begin travelling across the same paths as silk and spices. Artistic styles influence distant cultures. New inventions spread gradually from one region to another. Some researchers believe that the Silk Roads helped transmit early forms of paper-making, new agricultural crops, and philosophical ideas across continents. Others caution that these exchanges were complex processes that unfolded slowly over many centuries. Still, the caravan routes undeniably become channels through which civilizations influence one another. You sit beside the caravan fire as night settles across the plateau. The traders speak softly about distant cities. One man describes the enormous markets of Antioch near the Mediterranean. Another speaks of the great cities of Central Asia where Persian, Greek, and Indian cultures mix. A third traveller claims to have heard stories of lands far beyond China where the sun rises from unknown oceans. Listening to these stories, you realize that Persia once again occupies the center of a vast world, not through conquest alone, but through connection. Caravans continue arriving and departing beneath the endless sky. The Parthian Empire stands at the crossroads of civilizations, and through its roads, deserts, and mountain passes, the ancient world becomes more interconnected than ever before. Yet these growing connections also bring new tensions, for beyond the western borders of Parthian territory lies another rising power, an empire whose ambitions will soon collide with Persia's once again, the Empire of Rome. The caravan you followed across the plateau eventually reaches the western frontier of the Parthian world. Here the landscape begins to change again. Dry valleys give way to rolling hills and distant rivers flow toward lands controlled by another powerful civilization. Beyond these frontiers lies the Roman world. For centuries, Rome has expanded steadily across the Mediterranean. What began as a small city in Italy has grown into a vast empire controlling lands from Spain to Egypt. Now its eastern borders approach the territories ruled by the Parthian kings. You stand beside a frontier fortress where soldiers watch carefully across the open plain. On one side lies Parthian territory, on the other lands influenced by Roman authority. Between them stretches a zone of tension that will shape the politics of the region for hundreds of years. One widely accepted historical fact is that the Parthian and Roman empires became two of the most powerful rivals of the ancient world. Their struggle for influence centered largely on control of the lands between them, especially the region known as Mesopotamia. These fertile river valleys had long been valuable for agriculture, trade, and strategic positioning. Both empires wanted them. You travel south toward the Euphrates River, where Roman and Parthian forces occasionally face one another across the water. Armies patrol the banks, watching for signs of movement from the opposite side. Sometimes these encounters lead to open warfare. One of the most famous of these clashes occurs in 53 BCE at the Battle of Carrhae. You imagine yourself standing among the Roman soldiers preparing for battle beneath the blazing sun of the Mesopotamian plain. Their commander is a Roman general named Crassus, one of the most powerful political figures in Rome at the time. Confident in the strength of the Roman legions, Crassus marches eastward into Parthian territory. But the Parthian army he encounters fights in a very different way. Instead of meeting the Romans in close combat, Parthian horse archers circle the Roman formations firing arrows from a distance. Their mobility allows them to strike repeatedly while avoiding the heavy infantry of the Roman legions. The tactic proves devastating. Roman shields offer some protection, but the relentless rain of arrows gradually weakens their formations. The Parthian cavalry continues maneuvering across the open desert, striking and retreating again and again. Eventually the Roman army collapses under the pressure. Crassus himself is killed during the disastrous campaign. The defeat at Carrhae becomes one of the most humiliating losses in Roman military history. Historians often highlight this battle as a clear demonstration of how Parthian cavalry tactics could overcome even the disciplined Roman legions under the right conditions. Yet scholars continue debating the full story behind the battle. Some researchers suggest Crassus may have made serious strategic mistakes by leading his army into open desert terrain where Roman infantry had little advantage. Others believe the Parthian commanders demonstrated remarkable skill in exploiting their strengths against Roman weaknesses. Whatever the exact reasons, the victory strengthens Parthian confidence along the frontier. But it does not end the rivalry. For the next several centuries, Rome and Parthia continued competing for influence across the region. Sometimes they fight open wars. At other times, they maintain uneasy peace through diplomacy and political alliances. You arrive in the ancient city of Ctesiphon, one of the Parthian capitals located near the Tigris River. The city lies close to the borderlands where Roman influence begins. Caravans still pass through its markets, but soldiers remain visible in the streets. The possibility of war is never far away. Roman emperors occasionally launch campaigns into Parthian territory, hoping to capture important cities or install friendly rulers. Parthian forces respond with raids and counterattacks along the frontier. Despite these conflicts, neither empire fully destroys the other. Instead, the frontier between them becomes a shifting boundary where cultures mix and political influence constantly changes. Some historians argue that this long rivalry actually helped stabilize the region in an unusual way. Because both empires were powerful enough to resist the other, neither side could easily dominate the entire Near East. The result was a kind of balance of power that lasted for centuries. You walk along the riverbank at sunset watching merchants load goods onto boats bound for distant cities. Even here, near the contested frontier trade continues. Roman coins circulate in markets alongside Parthian currents. Greek language inscriptions appear beside local Iranian scripts. Cultural exchange persists even in the shadow of military rivalry. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of Roman goods appearing deep within Parthian territory, while Eastern luxuries continue flowing into Roman markets. The Silk Roads and the Mediterranean trade networks remain interconnected despite political tensions. Some scholars suggest this complex relationship between Rome and Parthia represents one of the earliest examples of long-term geopolitical competition between great powers. Others caution that ancient diplomacy and warfare often followed patterns very different from modern international politics. Still, the rivalry undeniably shapes the history of the region. As night falls across the frontier, The watchfires of both empires flicker along distant hills. Soldiers keep careful guard. Caravans continue their journeys, and the people living along these borders grow accustomed to a world where two great civilizations watch each other across the horizon. For nearly 3 centuries, the Parthian Empire will hold its ground against Rome, but history continues moving forwards. Deep within the Iranian plateau, new forces are quietly forming. For the Parthian king's power has always depended on alliances among noble families. Yet over time, this loose structure begins to weaken. Local rulers grow more independent. Internal struggles become more frequent. And somewhere in the southern lands of Persia, a new dynasty is preparing to challenge the Parthian order. A dynasty that will once again reshape the destiny of Persia. The frontier fires between Rome and Parthia eventually fade behind you as you journey back toward the heart of the Iranian plateau. The Parthian Empire has ruled these lands for centuries, balancing trade diplomacy and warfare across a vast and diverse territory. Yet beneath the surface of this long rule, subtle changes are unfolding. You travel south into the region once known as Persis, the ancestral homeland of the ancient Persian kings. The land here still carries echoes of the Achaemenid past. Ruins of old palaces and ceremonial structures stand quietly among the hills, reminders of an empire that once stretched across much of the known world. Local siege rulers in this region maintain a strong sense of Persian identity. Among them is a noble family that governs parts of Persis under the loose authority of the Parthian kings. Within this family, a new leader emerges. His name is Ardashir. One widely recognized historical fact is that in the early 3rd century, Ardashir begins a rebellion that will eventually overthrow the Parthian Empire and establish a new Persian dynasty known as the Sasanian Empire. You imagine the early stages of his rise. At first, Ardashir is only a regional ruler controlling a relatively small territory in southern Persia. Yet he is ambitious and deeply aware of the region's ancient heritage. Some historians believe he deliberately connected his political movement to the memory of the old Achaemenid kings in order to strengthen his legitimacy. Others suggest that local dissatisfaction with Parthian rule creates an opportunity for a strong leader to unite the region. Either way, Ardashir begins expanding his influence beyond his original territory. You stand beside a fortress overlooking a narrow valley where his forces gather. The soldiers are not only from Persis. Allies from nearby regions begin joining the campaign as Ardashir's reputation grows. Unlike the loose confederation structure of the Parthian Empire, Ardashir appears determined to build a stronger and more centralized state. His forces move steadily northward. Local governors loyal to the Parthian king attempt to resist, but many are defeated or absorbed into the rising movement. The final confrontation comes in 224 CE, when Ardashir's army meets the forces of the Parthian king Artabanus IV. The battle takes place somewhere within the Iranian plateau, though historians continue debating the exact location. Ancient accounts suggest the fighting was fierce and decisive. When the battle ends, the Parthian king is defeated. After nearly 5 centuries of rule, the Parthian Empire comes to an end. In its place rises a new Persian dynasty. Ardashir crowns himself king and begins building what will become the Sasanian Empire. You travel to his new capital, where construction crews are already at work building palaces, fortifications, and administrative centres. Unlike the Parthian system, which relied heavily on powerful noble families, Ardashir begins creating a more centralized government structure. Royal authority becomes stronger. Provincial administration becomes more closely tied to the court. Some historians interpret this transformation as an attempt to revive the centralized traditions of the ancient Achaemenid Empire. Others argue that the Sasanians were creating a new political model, shaped by the realities of their time, rather than simply restoring the past. Yet there is no doubt that the new rulers deliberately emphasize Persian identity. You walk through a royal hall where stone carvings display scenes of the king receiving divine approval for his rule. In one famous relief, Ardashir is shown receiving a ring of authority from a divine figure associated with Ahura Mazda. These images reinforce the connection between royal power and spiritual legitimacy. The Sasanian rulers see themselves not only as political leaders, but also as guardians of Persian culture and religion. One particularly striking change appears in the role of religion within the empire. While earlier Persian empires had generally allowed a wide variety of religious practices, the Sasanian kings begin promoting Zoroastrianism as a central pillar of the state. Fire temples are expanded and supported by royal patronage. Priests gain greater influence in public life. Sacred texts are collected and organized more systematically. Scholars still debate how uniform religious practice actually became across the empire. Some regions likely continued maintaining diverse traditions alongside official Zoroastrian institutions, but the connection between kingship and religious authority becomes much stronger under Sasanian rule. You wander through the bustling markets of the new capital city. Merchants continued trading goods from distant lands, silk from the east, spices from India, glass and metalwork from Roman territories. Despite political changes, the trade networks linking Persia to the wider world remain active. Yet the Sasanians inherit not only the economic opportunities of the region, but also its geopolitical challenges. To the west, the Roman Empire still stands as a powerful rival. Now the frontier conflicts that once existed between Rome and the Parthians will continue between Rome and the new Persian dynasty. For centuries to come, the two great empires will compete for the control of the same strategic territories. But for now, the rise of the Sasanian Empire marks an important turning point. After generations of Parthian rule shaped by tribal alliances and regional autonomy, Persia once again becomes the center of a powerful and centralized Iranian state. The legacy of Cyrus and the ancient Persian kings is being remembered and reimagined, and across the plateau the banners of the Sasanian dynasty now fly above cities, fortresses and caravan routes. Persia has entered a new imperial age. The rise of the Sasanian Empire brings a new sense of order to the Iranian plateau. As you continue travelling through the lands once ruled by Parthian nobles, you begin to notice subtle but important changes. Cities are being reorganized. Administrative offices appear more structured. Royal authority now flows outward from a stronger central court. But perhaps the most visible transformation appears in the religious landscape. You approach a hilltop complex where tall stone walls surround a carefully guarded sanctuary. From within the courtyard, a soft glow flickers against the evening sky. Another sacred fire burns inside. Yet this temple feels more formal than the smaller shrines you encountered earlier in Persian history. Priests move carefully through the courtyard, wearing white robes and cloth coverings over their mouths designed to keep their breath from polluting the sacred flame. This is one of the great fire temples supported by the Sasanian state. One widely recognized historical fact is that under the Sasanian dynasty, Zoroastrianism becomes more closely tied to imperial authority than at any earlier period of Persian history. The religion had long existed within Iranian culture, but now the state actively promotes it as a central part of political and spiritual life. You walk through the temple's outer halls where sacred fires are maintained by trained priests known as magi. These priests perform rituals designed to preserve purity and maintain the spiritual order believed to govern the universe. Large metal vessels hold the flames, which are carefully fed with dry wood and aromatic materials. The fires must never be allowed to extinguish. Within Zoroastrian belief, such sacred flames symbolize divine truth and the presence of cosmic order. You sit quietly beside the courtyard fountain while a priest explains the significance of these rituals to visiting pilgrims. He speaks of the eternal struggle between truth and falsehood, between order and chaos. These ideas, first associated with the teachings of Zarathustra centuries earlier, now form part of the official worldview of the empire. Sasanian kings often present themselves as defenders of this cosmic order. Royal inscriptions describe rulers as chosen protectors of righteousness, working alongside the divine will of Ahura Mazda. Some historians see this alliance between throne and temple as one of the defining characteristics of Sasanian governance. Others caution that the relationship between religious leaders and royal authority may not always have been perfectly harmonious. Priests sometimes gained significant influence, and tensions occasionally arose over who held ultimate authority in matters of law and morality. Still, the partnership between the monarchy and the Zoroastrian clergy becomes a powerful force shaping society. You walk into a large hall where scribes carefully copy religious texts onto parchment and prepared materials. One particularly important project during this period involves collecting and organizing the sacred writings of the Avesta. For For centuries, many Zoroastrian hymns and teachings have been transmitted orally. Under Sasanian patronage, efforts are made to preserve and standardize these texts in written form. Scholars continue debating exactly how much of the Avesta survives from its earliest form and how much was shaped during this period of codification. But there is little doubt that the Sasanian era played a crucial role in preserving the religion's teachings for future generations. The influence of religion extends beyond temples and royal inscriptions. It also shapes daily life. You walk through a village where families prepare evening meals while the last light of sunset fades across the plateau. Before eating, some individuals quietly recite prayers facing the setting sun. Parents teach children the importance of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. These ethical principles remain central to Zoroastrian practice. Purity laws also guide many aspects of everyday behavior. Careful attention is given to maintaining cleanliness in relation to water, fire, and the earth. Special rituals mark important life events such as birth, marriage, and death. One particularly distinctive practice involves burial customs. Because Zoroastrian tradition seeks to protect the elements of earth and fire from contamination, bodies are often placed in structures known as dakmas or towers of silence. You travel outside the village to a rocky hill where such a structure stands. The circular stone platform allows natural processes to return the body to the environment without directly burying it in soil. Archaeologists have discovered remains of these towers across regions once ruled by the Sasanian Empire. However, historians remain divided about how uniformly these practices were followed across the vast territories of the empire. Some regions may have adapted burial customs based on local traditions and practical conditions. The religious life of Sasanian Persia was likely more diverse than official texts sometimes suggest, even so that the prominence of Zoroastrian institutions becomes one of the defining features of the era. Fire temples appear across many cities and rural regions. Priests hold respected positions within society, and the connection between spiritual belief and political authority becomes deeply embedded in the structure of the empire. As night falls once again across the plateau, the sacred fire within the temple continues burning. Its flame reflects softly against polished metal vessels and carved stone walls. Outside, the stars stretch across the dark sky. The Sasanian Empire now stands strong, but beyond the western horizon another great power still watches carefully. The Roman world has not disappeared, and soon the ancient rivalry between Persia and the Western empires will enter one of its most dramatic and exhausting chapters. Morning returns gently across the Iranian plateau. The sacred fires of the temple still burn, priests continue their rituals, and the Sasanian kings now rule a powerful and organized empire. Yet Persia during this era is not defined only by politics and religion. It's also a time of remarkable cultural creativity. You enter a growing Sasanian city where craftsmen begin their work as sunlight spills into narrow streets. The sound of metal tools tapping against stone echoes from a nearby workshop. Artisans carve decorative patterns into silver bowls. Weavers stretch threads across large wooden looms to produce richly coloured textiles. Stonemasons shape blocks that will soon form part of new palaces and bridges. One widely recognised historical fact is that the Sasanian period became one of the great cultural high points of ancient Persian civilization. The empire developed distinctive artistic styles that influenced neighbouring regions from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. You walk through a royal workshop where metalworkers produce beautifully crafted plates and drinking vessels made from silver and gold. The designs of it often show royal hunting scenes. A king rides a powerful horse through tall grass while drawing a bow toward a fleeing animal. Lions, wild boars, and deer appear frequently at these images. Such scenes are not simply decorative. They symbolize royal strength, courage, and the king's role as protector of order in the natural world. Many of these objects eventually travel far beyond Persia through trade and diplomacy. Archaeologists have discovered Sasanian silverware in locations stretching from Europe to China. This wide distribution suggests that Persian artistic styles were admired across many cultures. You continue walking through the city and arrive at a construction site where workers are raising the walls of an enormous building. This structure will become part of a royal palace complex. Unlike earlier Persian architecture that relied heavily on stone columns, many Sasanian buildings used large domed halls constructed with innovative brick techniques. One famous example of this style is the Takhasra, an immense vaulted hall built in the imperial capital near Ctesiphon. Its giant arch rises dramatically above the surrounding landscape. Even today, the remains of the arch still stand as one of the largest single-span brick vaults ever constructed in the ancient world. Historians often view such architectural achievements as evidence of advanced engineering knowledge within the Sasanian Empire, yet scholars continue discussing exactly how these techniques developed. Some researchers believe they evolved from earlier Mesopotamian building traditions. Others argue that Persian builders refined these methods to create their own distinctive architectural style. As you explore the city further, you notice that cultural life here extends beyond architecture and craftsmanship. Scholars gather in quiet courtyards to discuss philosophy, medicine, and astronomy. One particularly important centre of learning during this period is the Academy of Gundashapur, located in southwestern Persia. This institution becomes famous for bringing together scholars from many different backgrounds. Greek philosophers who fled political turmoil in the Byzantine world find refuge here. Indian mathematicians share new ideas about numbers and astronomy. Persian physicians study ancient medical texts while developing new treatments for illness. Some historians believe Gundashapur functioned as one of the earliest examples of a multicultural academic centre where knowledge from different civilizations could be exchanged. However, researchers remain divided about the exact scale of the academy and how formal its structure truly was. Even so, the intellectual atmosphere of the Sasanian world appears remarkably vibrant. You sit beneath the shade of a garden tree where students quietly read from scrolls and discuss complex ideas. Nearby, a teacher explains astronomical observations that help predict seasonal changes important for agriculture. In another courtyard, poets recite verses celebrating heroic figures from Persia's distant past. Many of these stories preserve memories of ancient kings and legendary warriors whose adventures form part of the cultural identity of the Iranian world. Although the famous epic poem Shahnameh will not be written until centuries later, many of its stories likely draw upon oral traditions preserved during the Sasanian period. These tales celebrate themes of honor, bravery, and the struggle between justice and chaos. They reflect values that have shaped Persian identity for generations. Music and performance also flourish during this era. You hear the gentle sound of stringed instruments drifting from a nearby gathering, where musicians play melodies during a royal celebration. Court entertainers perform stories through song and dramatic storytelling. Such performances help preserve history and cultural memory in a society where oral tradition remains powerful. Archaeologists have discovered beautifully illustrated manuscripts and decorated musical instruments, suggesting that artistic expression held an important place in Sasanian court life. Yet even with this flourishing culture, the empire faces constant challenges. The wealth created by trade and craftsmanship must support armies guarding the western frontier against Roman and later Byzantine rivals. Taxes collected from farmers and merchants help maintain the royal court temples and administrative systems. Some historians suggest that the cost of maintaining such a complex empire may have placed increasing pressure on the population over time. Others argue that the Sasanian economy remained relatively strong thanks to its strategic control of trade routes. As evening approaches, you walk through a palace garden filled with carefully designed irrigation channels that carry water from nearby rivers. The scent of flowering plants fills the warm air. Courtiers discuss politics while scholars debate philosophy beneath the fading light. All around you, the cultural achievements of Sasanian Persia continue unfolding. Art, architecture learning and storytelling flourish beneath the authority of the kings. Yet beyond the peaceful gardens and busy workshops, the political world remains tense, because the western frontier is far from quiet. The rivalry between Persia and the Roman world has not ended. Instead, it is about to enter one of the longest and most exhausting struggles either civilization has ever faced. The quiet gardens and scholarly halls of Sasanian Persia slowly give way to a different atmosphere as you travel west toward the empire's frontier. The air becomes heavier with tension here. Fortresses stand along riverbanks, watchtowers rise on distant hills, and soldiers patrol roads that lead toward lands controlled by another great civilization. Beyond these borders lies the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of the Roman world. For centuries, Persia and Rome have faced one another across shifting frontiers. Under the Sasanians, this rivalry grows even more intense. Both empires control vast populations, powerful armies, and important trade routes. Each sees the other not only as a rival, but as a mirror image of imperial ambition. You arrive at a frontier city along the Euphrates River. Its walls are thick and reinforced, built to withstand sieges that might last for months. Merchants still trade in the markets, but soldiers are never far from sight. War between these two great empires erupts again and again across the centuries. One widely accepted historical fact is that the wars between the Byzantine and Sasanian empires became some of the longest-running conflicts of the ancient world. Beginning in the 3rd century and continuing into the early 7th century, these struggles shaped the political destiny of the entire Near East. You watch as a Sasanian army prepares for a campaign. Rows of heavily armoured cavalry stand beside their horses. These elite warriors are known as cataphracts, soldiers whose armour covers both rider and mount with metal scales or plates. Their appearance is formidable. When they charge across open ground, the impact can break enemy formations with overwhelming force. Infantry units assemble nearby carrying spears and shields, while supply wagons are loaded with food and equipment. Across the frontier, Byzantine forces prepare in similar fashion. Their soldiers include disciplined infantry legions and cavalry units trained in Roman military traditions refined over centuries. Historians often describe the Persian-Byzantine rivalry as a contest between two equally sophisticated military systems. Both sides develop advanced siege technologies. Both maintain professional armies supported by complex taxation systems. And both believe their empire represents the rightful order of the world. Yet scholars continue debating the deeper motivations behind these wars. Some historians argue that control of wealthy provinces such as Syria, Armenia, and Mesopotamia was the primary objective. Others suggest that religious differences between the Christian Byzantine Empire and the Zoroastrian Sasanian state gradually intensified political hostility. In reality, the causes were likely a mixture of strategic, economic, and ideological factors. You travel through time to the early 7th century when the conflict between these empires reaches its most dramatic phase. At this moment, a powerful Sasanian king named Khosrow II leads one of the most ambitious military campaigns in Persian history. His armies surge westward with remarkable speed. Persian forces capture major Byzantine cities including Damascus and Jerusalem. They even advance deep into Egypt, one of the richest provinces of the Byzantine world. For a time, it appears that the Sasanian Empire may succeed in defeating its ancient rival completely. You stand beside Persian soldiers entering Jerusalem in 614 CE. The city, sacred to multiple religious traditions, becomes one of the most symbolically important prizes of the war. Ancient accounts describe intense fighting during the conquest. Historians remain divided about the exact scale of destruction that occurred during the capture of the city, as different historical sources present varying descriptions. But there is no doubt that the event sends shockwaves across the Byzantine world. Meanwhile, Persian forces push farther west. Egypt falls under Sasanian control. Trade routes across the eastern Mediterranean begin shifting under Persian influence. For the first time in centuries, the balance of power strongly favours Persia. Yet the struggle is not over. Far to the northwest, a Byzantine emperor named Heraclius begins organising a desperate counter-offensive. You travel north with the Byzantine army as Heraclius launches a daring campaign deep into Persian territory. Rather than confronting the Persian armies directly in the contested borderlands, he marches into the heart of the Sasanian Empire itself. This unexpected strategy catches Persian forces off guard. The Byzantine army moves through Armenia and across the highlands of the Iranian frontier. Eventually, the two sides clash in a decisive confrontation near the city of Nineveh in 627 CE. The battle is fierce. Cavalry charges sweep across muddy fields beneath winter skies. Infantry lines struggle through the chaos of close combat. In the end, the Byzantine forces achieve victory, but the outcome does not immediately restore stability. The Sasanian Empire, already strained by years of exhausting warfare, begins to fracture internally. Political unrest spreads within the royal court. Several rulers rise and fall in quick succession. Historians often describe this final phase of the Persian-Byzantine conflict as devastating for both empires. Decades of war drain resources, weaken economies, and exhaust armies on both sides. Neither civilization emerges from the conflict truly victorious. And while the two ancient powers struggle to recover from their long rivalry, a new force begins emerging beyond the southern deserts. A movement that will soon transform the political and religious landscape of the entire region. For the Persian Empire, the greatest challenge in its long history is about to appear. The long wars between Persia and the Byzantine world finally begin to fade, but the exhaustion they leave behind spreads across both empires like a quiet shadow. Armies that once marched confidently across the frontier now return to cities struggling to rebuild. You travel through the Iranian plateau during these years of recovery. Fields are still being planted, markets reopen, but the political world feels fragile. Decades of conflicts have drained the strength of the Sasanian state. One widely recognized historical fact is that in the years following the final Byzantine-Sasanian War, the Persian Empire entered a period of severe internal instability. Several rulers rose and fell in rapid succession, and factions within the royal court competed fiercely for control. You stand in the capital city near Ctesiphon, where messengers arrive constantly carrying news of political changes across the empire. Nobles debate succession, military commanders worry about securing distant provinces, tax collectors struggle to maintain revenue from regions already strained by war. Some historians argue that the Sasanian political system, which tied royal authority closely to noble families and religious leaders, made periods of succession especially dangerous. When a strong king ruled, the system could function effectively. But when the throne became uncertain, powerful factions sometimes competed against one another in ways that weakened the state. Meanwhile, beyond the southern deserts, events are unfolding that few in Persia fully understand yet. You travel south toward the Arabian Peninsula, where a new religious movement has begun spreading among the tribes of Arabia. Its founder is a man named Muhammad. His teachings call for belief in one God and emphasize social justice, charity, and unity among believers. At first, these teachings spread gradually among the tribes of the region, but after Muhammad's death in 632 CE, the movement gains political momentum as well as spiritual influence. Arab tribes unite under the leadership of the early Islamic caliphs. Within a few years, armies begin moving northward from Arabia. Historians still debate how quickly these early Islamic forces developed their military strength. Some scholars emphasize the role of tribal unity and religious motivation. Others highlight the strategic skill of early commanders and the vulnerability of the exhausted Persian and Byzantine empires. Whatever the exact balance of factors, the expansion that follows is astonishingly rapid. You return to the Mesopotamian frontier, where Persian forces prepare to face these new armies. At first, the Persian commanders may not fully grasp the scale of the challenge ahead. For centuries, the empire has fought powerful rivals such as Rome and Byzantium. Compared to those civilizations, the newly unified Arab forces may have seemed less formidable, but the reality soon proves very different. In 636 CE, one of the most decisive battles takes place near a location known as Al-Qadisiyah. You stand beside the Persian army as it gathers on the open plains. The forces still appear impressive. War elephants stand at the front of the Persian lines. Armoured cavalry assemble behind them. Infantry units prepare for battle beneath the banners of the empire. Across the field stand the Arab armies, smaller but highly mobile. Their commanders use flexible tactics designed to counter the heavier Persian formations. The battle lasts for several days. Dust rises into the sky as cavalry charges clash with infantry lines. War elephants initially cause confusion among the opposing forces, but gradually the tide begins turning. Arab forces manage to disrupt the Persian lines and isolate key units within the army. Eventually the Persian defense collapses. The defeat at Al-Qadisiyah opens the road toward the Sasanian capital. You travel quickly with the advancing forces toward Ctesiphon. The once magnificent imperial center that symbolized Persian authority for centuries now stands vulnerable. Persian leaders attempt to organize resistance, but the empire is already weakened by the internal divisions and years of exhausting war. When Ctesiphon falls, it marks a turning point that few observers could have imagined only a generation earlier. The Sasanian Empire, one of the great powers of the ancient world, begins collapsing with surprising speed. Over the following years, Arab armies continue advancing across Persian territories. Some cities resist fiercely, others surrender after negotiations. Historians continue discussing the complex reactions of local populations during these events. Some communities may have welcomed relief from heavy taxation or political instability, Others likely resisted strongly, especially in regions closely tied to the Sasanian elite. The reality was likely different from place to place across the vast lands of the empire. Yet by the middle of the 7th century, the political structure of Sasanian Persia has largely disappeared. The last Sasanian king, Yazdegerd III, flees eastward, attempting to gather support for continued resistance, but his efforts ultimately fail. After more than 400 years of rule, the Sasanian dynasty comes to an end. You walk through the quiet ruins of former imperial cities where new administrators begin establishing authority under the expanding Islamic Caliphate. The transformation unfolding across Persia is profound. A new religion now spreads through lands where Zoroastrian fire temples once stood as symbols of imperial identity. New political leaders reshape systems of governance and taxation, and the ancient Persian world enters a completely new chapter of its long history. Yet the culture of Persia itself does not disappear. The language traditions and intellectual heritage of the Iranian plateau will continue influencing the civilization that emerges from this transformation. Even under new rulers, the memory of Persia remains alive. And in the centuries to come, Persian culture will quietly reshape the Islamic world itself. The fall of the Sasanian Empire marks a dramatic turning point across the Iranian plateau. The royal palaces of ancient Persian kings no longer command the political world, and the banners that now fly above the cities belong to the expanding Islamic Caliphate. Yet as you continue walking through these lands, something surprising becomes clear. Although political authority has changed, Persian culture does not disappear. Instead, it begins quietly reshaping the new civilization growing across the region. You arrive in a bustling city where administrators of the early Islamic Caliphate manage affairs once controlled by Sasanian officials. Markets remain full of merchants trading silk, spices, and metal goods. Farmers continue cultivating the fertile lands along rivers and irrigation channels built centuries earlier. Life goes on. One widely accepted historical fact is that after the Arab conquests of the 7th century, Persia became part of the rapidly expanding Islamic world. The region was incorporated into the Umayyad and later Abbasid Caliphate's political system centered first in Damascus and later in Baghdad. But the Persian people themselves played an increasingly important role within these new structures. You walk into a government office where scribes sit carefully recording taxes and legal documents. Some write in Arabic, the language of the new ruling administration. Others continue using forms of Middle Persian, the language that had developed during the Sasanian period. Over time, a fascinating cultural blending begins to unfold. Arabic becomes the language of religious scholarship and administration across the Islamic world. Yet Persian traditions continue influencing literature, art, court culture, and systems of governance. Historians often describe this process as one of cultural integration rather than simple replacement. Persian scholars, administrators, and intellectuals become essential figures within the Abbasid Caliphate, one of the most influential Islamic dynasties. You travel west to the city of Baghdad, which was founded in the 8th century as the capital of the Abbasid Empire. Here the cultural energy of the Islamic world reaches remarkable heights. In the city's markets you hear many languages spoken: Arabic, Persian, Greek, Syriac, and others brought by traders from distant lands. The Abbasid court actively supports learning and scholarship. Libraries grow filled with manuscripts collected from many civilizations. One famous institution associated with this intellectual movement is the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Although historians continue debating its exact structure and organization, there is little doubt that Baghdad became a major center for the translation and study of scientific and philosophical works. Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian administrative knowledge all contribute to the intellectual life of the city. You sit inside a quiet study hall where scholars gather around wooden tables covered with scrolls. One group discusses medical knowledge inherited from ancient Persian and Greek traditions. Another studies astronomy, calculating the movement of stars across the night sky. A third group debates philosophical questions about the nature of knowledge in the universe. Many of the scholars involved in this intellectual flowering come from Persian backgrounds. Their influence helps shape what historians later describe as the Islamic Golden Age. Yet scholars remain divided about how Persian identity evolved during this period. Some researchers argue that the spread of Islam gradually transformed Persian culture into something fundamentally new. Others believe Persian traditions remained strong and continued influencing the Islamic world in subtle but powerful ways. The truth likely lies somewhere between these views. As you walk through the streets of a Persian city during the 9th century, you see this cultural blending everywhere. Mosques rise beside older architectural structures built during earlier empires. Poets compose verses in both Arabic and Persian. Craftsmen produce textiles and ceramics that combine artistic traditions from multiple civilizations. Perhaps one of the most important developments during this era is the gradual revival of the Persian language in a new written form. This language, known today as New Persian, begins appearing in literature and poetry during the 9th and 10th centuries. Unlike earlier Middle Persian, which used complex writing systems, New Persian adopts the Arabic script while preserving the underlying structure of the Persian language. This transformation allows Persian literature to flourish once again. Some historians see this linguistic revival as a sign that Persian cultural identity remained remarkably resilient even after the fall of the Sasanian Empire. Others suggest the New Persian literary tradition represented a creative adaptation to the Islamic cultural environment rather than a simple continuation of the past. Either way, the results are extraordinary. Poets, historians, and scholars begin producing works that celebrate Persian history, ethics, and imagination. Stories of ancient kings and legendary heroes return to public memory through epic poetry. These cultural expressions help preserve the memory of Persia's long past. As evening settles over the city, you sit beside a quiet garden fountain, where scholars gather to exchange ideas beneath the fading light. The world around you is different from the empires that once ruled here. New religious traditions shape daily life. New political structures govern the land. Yet beneath these changes, the deep cultural currents of Persia continue flowing. The language survives. The artistic traditions evolve. The historical memory remains alive. Persia has entered the Islamic world, but in many ways Persia is also helping shape what that world becomes. The evening breeze moves softly through the gardens of the city as you sit beside the fountain. The quiet sound of flowing water blends with distant voices reciting poetry in the fading light. In this world shaped by the meeting of Persian and Islamic traditions, poetry becomes one of the most powerful ways people express identity, history, and imagination. You walk through a courtyard where a small gathering of listeners sits on woven carpets beneath lanterns hanging from wooden beams. A poet stands at the center holding a manuscript written in elegant script. When he begins to speak, the audience listens carefully. His words tell stories of ancient kings, heroic warriors, and the long struggles between justice and chaos that once defined the old Persian world. Yet these stories are now told in a new language form. One widely recognized historical fact is that during the 9th and 10th centuries, New Persian literature experienced a remarkable revival under various regional dynasties that governed parts of Iran within the broader Islamic world. These rulers, many of whom were themselves of Persian origin, actively supported poets and scholars who celebrated Iranian cultural traditions. You travel east toward the court of one such dynasty, the Samanids, who rule parts of Central Asia and northeastern Iran during the 10th century. Their capital city of Bukhara becomes a center of Persian literary life. The court gathers poets, historians, and intellectuals who begin shaping the new Persian literary tradition. One of the earliest and most influential poets of this era is Rudaki. You imagine him standing before the royal court reciting verses that blend Persian storytelling traditions with new poetic forms. Although only fragments of his work survive today, historians widely regard Rudaki as one of the founders of classical Persian poetry. His verses celebrate love, wisdom, nature, and the passing of time. The rhythms of the language flow gently, making them ideal for oral recitation in gatherings like the one you are witnessing. But poetry during this period does more than entertain. It also helps preserve cultural memory. You continue traveling through time until you reach the 11th century, when one of the most important literary works in Persian history begins to take shape. Its author is a poet named Ferdowsi. For many years, Ferdowsi works on an enormous project. He gathers stories that have been passed down for generations through oral tradition and earlier written texts. These stories tell the history of Persian kings from mythical beginnings to the fall of the Sasanian Empire. The result becomes the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings. This epic poem contains tens of thousands of verses and tells the sweeping story of Iran's legendary and historical rulers. You sit quietly in a courtyard where a storyteller begins reciting part of the Shahnameh to an attentive audience. The tale describes heroic battles, wise kings, tragic betrayals, and noble warriors who defend their homeland. Figures such as Rostam, the legendary champion of Iran, appear again and again in these stories. For many listeners, these characters represent ideals of courage, loyalty, and justice. Historians often emphasize how important the Shahnameh became in preserving Persian identity during centuries when political power frequently shifted between different dynasties. By telling the story of Iran's ancient past in the Persian language, Ferdowsi helped ensure that the memory of pre-Islamic Persia would remain part of the cultural imagination. However, scholars continue debating exactly how much of the Shahnameh reflects historical events and how much belongs to myth and legend. Many of its stories combine elements from older Persian traditions with imaginative storytelling shaped by the poet himself. Yet this mixture of history and myth is precisely what gives the epic its lasting power. As you listen to the storyteller's voice rise and fall beneath the lantern light, you realize that these stories create a bridge between past and present. The ancient kings of Persia live again through poetry. The struggles of earlier generations become lessons for new audiences, and the Persian language itself grows richer through the rhythm and imagery of these verses. Beyond poetry, Persian scholars also make significant contributions to science, philosophy, and medicine during this era. You travel to another city where a young scholar named Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, studies medicine and philosophy. His writings will later influence medical knowledge for centuries across both the Islamic world and medieval Europe. Scholars like him demonstrate how Persian intellectual traditions continue shaping the broader civilization emerging across the Islamic world. Yet historians remain divided about how these intellectual achievements should be understood. Some researchers view the scientific and philosophical developments of this period as part of a shared Islamic civilization rather than belonging to any single cultural group. Others emphasize the particularly strong role played by Persian scholars and institutions in sustaining and expanding this intellectual heritage. Either way, the cultural landscape you're witnessing feels vibrant and creative. Poets compose verses beneath palace lanterns. Scholars debate philosophy in quiet study halls. Storytellers keep ancient legends alive in marketplaces and gardens. Persian identity, once shaped by the Achaemenid and Sasanian empires, now finds new expression through language, literature, and learning. And as the centuries continue unfolding, these cultural traditions will carry Persia's legacy forward into an ever-changing political world. The poetic voices you heard beneath the lanterns continue echoing through the centuries as the Persian world moves forward once again. Stories of ancient kings, heroic warriors, and noble courts travel from city to city through the voices of poets and storytellers. Yet beyond the gardens and marketplaces of these flourishing cities, distant thunder is beginning to roll across the horizon. You travel eastward across the wide steppes of Central Asia where the land stretches endlessly beneath the sky. Winds sweep across tall grasses and herds of horses move with their riders across the open plains. From these vast lands are new forces emerging. The Mongols. One widely accepted historical fact is that in the early 13th century a leader named Temujin united many of the nomadic tribes of the Mongolian steppe. After consolidating his authority, he became known as Genghis Khan. Under his leadership, the Mongol armies would build the largest contiguous land empire in history. You stand beside a caravan crossing the deserts of Central Asia when rumours begin spreading among the traders. Cities in the east have fallen. Armies riding swift horses have conquered territories with astonishing speed. Their tactics are unfamiliar to many settled civilizations. The Mongol warriors travel light and move quickly across enormous distances. Their mastery of mounted archery allows them to strike suddenly and withdraw before enemies can organize resistance. Historians often emphasize the extraordinary mobility of the Mongol armies as one of the key reasons for their success. But scholars continue debating the precise combination of factors behind their rapid expansion. Some researchers point to advanced military organization and communication systems within Mongol society. Others emphasize the political fragmentation of the regions they invaded, which made coordinated resistance difficult. Whatever the explanation, the Mongol advance toward Persia becomes inevitable. You travel forward to the year 1219 when Mongol forces begin their invasion of territories ruled by the Khwarezmian Empire, a powerful state that had emerged in parts of Persia and Central Asia. The conflict begins after a diplomatic dispute involving the killing of Mongol envoys. Genghis Khan responds with overwhelming force. You watch from a distant hill as Mongol armies approach a fortified city along the trade routes. Their soldiers move with remarkable discipline. Mounted archers circle the city while engineers prepare siege equipment capable of breaching even strong walls. Some cities resist fiercely. Others surrender quickly in hopes of avoiding destruction. Historical accounts of these invasions describe intense violence during certain sieges, though historians remain cautious about the exact numbers and details reported by later chroniclers. Many medieval sources were written by observers deeply affected by the trauma of the events. Archaeologists continue studying the remains of cities destroyed during the Mongol campaigns to better understand what actually happened during this turbulent period. What cannot be denied is the scale of the disruption. Cities that had flourished as centers of trade and learning faced devastation. Caravan routes that once carried silk and spices fall silent in many regions. The political structures that had governed Persia for centuries collapse rapidly. You walk through the ruins of a once thriving marketplace where broken walls and abandoned streets tell the story of a world suddenly overturned. Yet history rarely stops entirely. Even amid destruction, new political systems begin forming. After the death of Genghis Khan, the enormous Mongol Empire is divided among his descendants. Persia becomes part of a new Mongol-ruled state known as the Ilkhanate. You travel to the Ilkhanid court where Mongol rulers begin adapting to the cultures of the lands they now govern. At first, their administration remains strongly influenced by Mongol traditions. But over time, something remarkable happens. The Mongol rulers of Persia begin adopting elements of Persian culture. They employ Persian administrators who understand the complex systems of taxation and governance developed over centuries. They support scholars, artists, and architects who revive cultural life within the empire. Some Mongol rulers even convert to Islam, further integrating themselves into the societies they govern. Historians often describe this transformation as an example of cultural adaptation rather than simple domination. Although the Mongols arrived as conquerors, they gradually became part of the cultural landscape of Persia. You walk through the city of Tabriz, which becomes one of the Ilkhanid capitals. Markets reopen. Caravans once again cross the trade routes linking Persia to China and the Mediterranean. Artists create intricate manuscripts decorated with brilliant colors and delicate illustrations. These works combine Persian artistic traditions with influences from Chinese painting introduced during the Mongol period. Scholars remain divided about how deeply Mongol rule reshaped Persian society. Some emphasize the destruction caused by the initial invasions. Others highlight the cultural exchange that followed as Mongol rulers adopted Persian administrative practices and artistic styles. Both perspectives contain elements of truth. The Mongol arrival represents both catastrophe and transformation. Yet through it all, Persian culture once again proves remarkably resilient. The language continues evolving. Poetry continues flowing. Scholars continue studying ancient knowledge while creating new ideas. As evening settles across the city, lanterns glow softly along the streets. The world has changed dramatically since the days of the Sasanian kings, but Persia's long cultural story continues moving forward. And from the shifting political landscape of the Mongol era, new dynasties will soon emerge to reshape the Iranian world once again. The city of Tabriz glows softly under rows of lantern light as evening settles across the streets. Merchants close their shops after a long day of trade. Scholars gather in quiet courtyards, and travelers prepare for the next stage of their journeys across the Iranian world. The Mongol conquest that once seemed to shake the foundations of Persia has gradually become part of the region's complex history. Now the Ilkhanate rulers govern these lands, blending Mongol authority with Persian traditions that have proven remarkably resilient. But time continues moving forward, and even this Mongol dynasty will not last forever. You walk through a busy administrative center where Persian scribes record tax shipments and legal agreements on carefully prepared documents. Although the ruling elite traces its origins to the Mongolian steppe, much of the day-to-day governance now relies on Persian bureaucratic systems developed centuries earlier. One widely recognized historical fact is that the Ilkhanate gradually became deeply influenced by Persian culture. Several Mongol rulers embraced Islam, and Persian administrators played key roles in managing the empire's finances, agriculture, and trade. Yet the political unity of the Mongol world begins weakening during the 14th century. After several generations of rule, the Ilkhanate fragments into smaller regional powers as rival leaders compete for authority. Historians often debate the main causes behind this fragmentation. Some scholars point to succession disputes within the Mongol ruling families. Others emphasize economic strain caused by declining trade networks and environmental challenges affecting agriculture. Whatever the combination of factors, central control gradually weakens. You travel across the Iranian plateau during these uncertain years. In some cities, local governors maintain stability and encourage trade to continue. In others, competing factions struggle for influence. The great caravan routes that once connected the Mongol world from China to Europe still exist, but they become less predictable as political unity fades. Yet within this shifting landscape, Persian cultural life begins reviving once again. You arrive in the city of Shiraz, a place known for its gardens, poetry, and scholarship. Even during periods of political uncertainty, Shiraz remains a center of literary and artistic creativity. Here you encounter the works of two of Persia's most celebrated poets, Sa'di and Hafez. You sit quietly in a garden courtyard as a small group gathers beneath flowering trees to listen to verses recited by a young scholar. The poetry of Sa'di, who lived in the 15th century, blends moral reflection with stories drawn from everyday life. His famous work, The Gulistan, presents lessons about ethics, leadership, and human nature through short anecdotes and elegant prose. Historians often describe Sa'di as a master of combining wisdom with gentle humor. His stories explore the behavior of kings and common people alike, reminding listeners that kindness, patience, and humility often bring greater strength than power alone. A generation later, the poet Hafez brings a different style to Persian literature. His verses are more mystical, filled with symbolic imagery involving gardens, wine, nightingales, and the beauty of the beloved. Scholars continue discussing the deeper meanings within Hafez's poetry. Some interpret his works as expressions of spiritual longing connected to Sufi mystical traditions. Others see them as reflections on the complexity of human emotion and the search for truth. For many readers, across centuries, the beauty of his language becomes its own form of wisdom. As the poems drift through the warm evening air, you realize that Persian culture has entered another period of renewal. Even without a single powerful empire controlling all of the Iranian lands, the language, literature, and artistic traditions of Persia continue flourishing. You walk through the markets of Shiraz where artisans craft decorated manuscripts containing the works of famous poets. Calligraphers carefully shape each letter with remarkable precision. Miniature painters illustrate scenes from epic stories and mystical poetry with vibrant colors. Historians often emphasize how the Persian miniature painting tradition expanded during these centuries, blending earlier Iranian styles with artistic influences introduced through Mongol connections with China. The result becomes one of the most distinctive visual art traditions of the medieval world. Meanwhile, new political powers begin emerging across the fragmented territories of Persia. Some rulers attempt to rebuild larger states that can restore stability to the region. Others govern smaller local kingdoms while maintaining alliances with neighboring powers. One particularly powerful conqueror soon appears from the lands of Central Asia. His name is Timur, known in later European histories as Tamerlane. Timur claims descent from the Mongol heritage of Genghis Khan, but he also presents himself as a champion of Persian culture and Islamic civilization. In the late 14th century, his armies sweep across Persia, Central Asia, and parts of the Middle East in a series of dramatic campaigns. Some historians view Timur as one of the last great conquerors in the long tradition of steppe empires. Others emphasize the cultural revival that followed his conquests as cities such as Samarkand and Herat became centers of art, architecture, and scholarship. Yet scholars remain divided about whether Timur's campaigns ultimately strengthened or weakened the long-term stability of the region. What is clear is that the political landscape of Persia continues changing. Empires rise and fall, dynasties appear and disappear, but through every transformation, Persian culture continues adapting and surviving. As night deepens across the gardens of Shiraz, the poetry of Sa'di and Hafez still echoes among the trees. Their words remind listeners that power and kingdoms may fade with time, But language, memory, and imagination can endure far longer, and soon another powerful dynasty will rise from within Persia itself, a dynasty that will once again redefine the identity of the Iranian world. The lanterns of Shiraz slowly fade behind you as the centuries continue unfolding across the Iranian plateau. Poets still recite verses beneath garden trees, artisans decorate manuscripts with intricate designs, and merchants continue travelling along ancient trade routes. Yet politically, the lands of Persia remain fragmented after the collapse of earlier dynasties. Regional rulers govern scattered territories while memories of past empires linger in the stories told by scholars and poets. Then, during the early 16th century, a new power begins rising from the northwest. You travel toward the mountainous region of Azerbaijan, where a young leader gathers followers around a powerful spiritual and political movement. His name is Ismail. One widely accepted historical fact is that in 1501, Ismail I founded the Safavid dynasty, establishing a new Persian Empire that would rule much of Iran for more than 2 centuries. But the origins of the Safavid movement are unusual. Before becoming rulers of a state, the Safavids were leaders of a mystical religious order known as the Sufi Brotherhood. Their followers believed their leaders possessed special spiritual authority and even divine favour. You stand among a gathering of supporters dressed in distinctive red headgear that symbolises their loyalty to the Safavid cause. These warriors, known as the Kizilbash, form the military backbone of Ismail's early campaigns. They fight with fierce devotion, believing they are defending both political leadership and spiritual truth. Historians often debate the exact reasons for the Safavid movement's rapid rise. Some scholars emphasize the charisma and leadership of Ismail himself. Others point to the widespread dissatisfaction among tribal groups and regional leaders who sought stronger political unity after years of fragmentation. Whatever the reasons, the Safavid armies move quickly across the plateau. Cities fall one after another. In 1501, Ismail captures the city of Tabriz and declares himself Shah of Iran. For the first time in many centuries, a powerful dynasty ruling from within Persia itself establishes control over much of the Iranian world. You walk through the streets of Tabriz during these early days of Safavid rule. Markets remain crowded with traders from Central Asia, Anatolia, and the Middle East. But a new sense of political authority is beginning to shape the city. Royal proclamations appear announcing the establishment of a new state. Officials begin reorganizing administrative systems across the territory. Perhaps the most important transformation of the Safavid era involves religion. Ismail declares Twelver Shahism as the official faith of the new Iranian state. This decision will have profound consequences for the future identity of Iran. At this moment in history, most people living in the region follow Sunni forms of Islam which had dominated the Islamic world for centuries. By promoting Shahism as the state religion, the Safavid rulers create a distinctive religious identity that separates their empire from neighbouring powers. Historians continued discussing why this decision was made. Some researchers argue that Ismail's personal beliefs and the influence of Shiite scholars played an important role. Others suggest that adopting Shahism helped unify the population under a religious identity distinct from the Sunni Ottoman Empire to the west. Either way, the Safavid policy gradually transforms the religious landscape of Persia. You enter a mosque where newly appointed scholars teach Shiite theology to students who gather on woven carpets beneath the arches. Religious institutions begin expanding across the empire. Clerics gain increasing influence within society as interpreters of religious law and spiritual authority. This transformation takes time. In many regions, local populations continue practicing older traditions for generations before the new religious structure becomes fully established. Archaeologists and historians continue examining how this religious shift unfolded differently across various provinces of the Safavid realm. But over time, schisma becomes deeply embedded within Iranian identity. You travel forward into the reign of one of the Safavid dynasty's most famous rulers, Shah Abbas I. During the late 16th and early 17th centuries, Abbas strengthens the empire through military reforms, administrative changes, and ambitious building projects. He moves the capital to a city that will become one of the most beautiful urban centers in the world, Isfahan. You walk through the wide boulevards of Safavid Isfahan, where fountains sparkle beneath the sunlight and grand architecture surrounds enormous public squares. The city's central plaza, known as Naksh-e-Jahan Square, becomes one of the largest public spaces ever built during this era. Magnificent mosques rise along its edges. Royal palaces overlook the open space where merchants, diplomats, and travelers gather. Historians often describe Safavid Isfahan as one of the great cities of the early modern world. European travelers visiting the city during this period write with amazement about its gardens, bridges, and bustling markets. Persian art and architecture flourish under royal patronage. Carpet weaving becomes one of the most celebrated artistic traditions of the empire. Intricately designed carpets produced in Safavid workshops will later become treasured works of art across the world. Yet scholars remain divided about the long-term stability of the Safavid system. While the empire achieves impressive cultural and political achievements, maintaining control over diverse tribal groups and frontier regions continues presenting challenges. Still, the Safavid dynasty succeeds in something extraordinary. It restores a strong Persian state after centuries of political fragmentation. It shapes the religious identity of Iran in ways that still influence the country today. And it once again places Persia at the center of a vibrant cultural and political world. As evening falls, across the wide squares of Isfahan, lanterns begin glowing beneath the domes of mosques and the arches of royal palaces. Persia has entered a new imperial chapter, one that will leave a lasting mark on the identity of Iran itself. The wide boulevards of Isfahan glow beneath rows of lanterns as evening settles over the Safavid capital. Water flows gently through stone channels in the gardens, and the great domes of mosques shimmer under the fading light. This city, built during the reign of Shah Abbas I, reflects a moment when Persia once again stands confident and powerful. Yet the transformation you are witnessing is not only political or architectural, it is deeply religious. The Safavid dynasty has made a decision that will shape the identity of Iran for centuries to come. They have declared Twelver Shi'ism as the official faith of the empire. You walk through a madrasa courtyard where students gather to study religious texts. Teachers explain the teachings of the 12 Imams, the central spiritual figures of Shiite belief. One widely recognized historical fact is that the Safavid rulers actively promoted Twelver Shi'ism across their territories beginning in the early 16th century. Before this period, the majority of people living in Persia had followed Sunni traditions similar to those practiced across much of the wider Islamic world. The Safavid policy gradually changes that religious landscape. You sit quietly as a scholar explains the story of the 12 Imams to his students. According to Twelver Shiite belief, these Imams are spiritual leaders descended from the Prophet Muhammad through his daughter Fatima and her husband Ali. They are seen not only as political heirs, but also as divinely guided figures who possess deep spiritual knowledge. The 12th Imam, according to tradition, did not die but entered a hidden state known as occultation. Followers believe he will one day return as a just leader who restores righteousness in the world. These ideas become central to the spiritual identity developing across Safavid Persia. Yet the process of establishing Shi'ism as the dominant faith does not happen overnight. You travel across rural provinces where many communities continue practicing older religious traditions that had existed for generations. Some people follow Sunni customs. Others combine local practices with Islamic belief in ways that reflect long regional histories. Safavid rulers gradually encourage the spread of Shiite scholarship and institutions. Clerics trained in Shiite theology are invited from other regions, particularly from areas such as Lebanon and southern Iraq, where Shiite communities had long existed. These scholars help establish schools' legal systems and religious teachings that strengthen the new religious structure. Historians often debate how much resistance occurred during this transformation. Some sources suggest that certain regions experienced tension as religious practices shifted. Other researchers argue that the process unfolded more gradually than earlier accounts suggested, allowing communities time to adapt. Either way, over several generations, the religious identity of Iran becomes increasingly shaped by Shiite belief. You enter a large mosque during a religious gathering, commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, one of the most important figures in Shiite tradition. The story recalls the events of the Battle of Karbala in 680 CE, when Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, was killed while opposing the rule of the Umayyad Caliph. For Shiite communities, Hussein's sacrifice represents a powerful symbol of resistance against injustice. Participants in the gathering listen carefully as a speaker recounts the tragedy. Some quietly reflect on its meaning. Others participate in rituals of remembrance that have become important expressions of Shiite identity. These commemorations, especially during the month of Muharram, grow increasingly significant within Safavid society. They reinforce themes of justice, sacrifice, and loyalty to the spiritual lineage of the Imams. Over time, these religious traditions become deeply woven into the cultural fabric of Iran. Beyond theology and ritual, Shi'ism also influences political thought. Safavid rulers often portray themselves as protectors of the Shiite community. Their legitimacy becomes connected not only to royal lineage but also to the defense of the faith. Some historians argue that this relationship between religion and political authority laid the foundations for later political ideas within Iranian society. Others caution that the Safavid system still placed ultimate power firmly in the hands of the monarchy rather than religious leaders. Yet the partnership between royal authority and Shiite institutions becomes one of the defining features of the Safavid state. You walk through the great square of Isfahan again, where travellers from distant lands gather. Ottoman merchants from the west observe the Safavid religious practices with curiosity, since their own empire follows Sunni traditions. Armenian traders conduct business in special quarters established by Shah Abbas to encourage commerce. European travellers write detailed descriptions of the Safavid court and its religious ceremonies. The Safavid Empire now stands as one of the major powers of the early modern world alongside the Ottoman Empire and the Mughal Empire in India. Together, these three great states form what historians sometimes call the Gunpowder Empires, powerful kingdoms that use new military technologies to maintain large territories. Yet even powerful empires face challenges over time. Internal tensions, shifting alliances, and economic pressures slowly begin affecting the Safavid system. Still, the transformation achieved during this era leaves an enduring legacy. The Safavids did not only rebuild a Persian state, they shaped the religious identity that continues defining Iran today. As night settles over Isfahan, the call to prayer echoes gently across the square. The domes glow softly beneath the moonlight. And within these walls, the spiritual traditions that took root during the Safavid era continue shaping the future of Iran. The domes of Isfahan slowly fade into the distance as the centuries continue unfolding across the Iranian plateau. The Safavid Empire has built a powerful state, shaped the religious identity of Persia, and filled its cities with remarkable works of art and architecture. Yet the world beyond Persia is also changing. You travel through the busy markets of the 17th century, where traders from distant lands speak in many languages. Their clothing, coins, and goods reflect an expanding global network of trade that is beginning to connect continents more closely than ever before. European merchants have arrived in increasing numbers. One widely recognized historical fact is that during the Safavid period, Persia became an important partner in growing trade relations with European powers such as England, Portugal, and the Netherlands. These new connections are part of a broader transformation taking place across the early modern world. European ships now sail around Africa and across the Indian Ocean, establishing direct sea routes to Asian markets that had once been reached mainly through overland trade. You walk along the busy commercial districts of Isfahan, where foreign traders negotiate with Persian merchants. English representatives from the East India Company discuss silk exports. Dutch traders examine carpets and spices. Armenian merchant communities act as intermediaries connecting Persian markets with European buyers. Silk becomes one of the most valuable commodities exported from Safavid Persia. Large quantities are produced in the northern provinces near the Caspian Sea, then transported to cities where international merchants purchase them for shipment toward Europe. Caravans loaded with silk thread and woven fabric move steadily along the roads leading to Persian ports on the Persian Gulf. Historians often note that these expanding trade networks brought significant wealth to parts of the Safavid economy. Cities flourished as centers of commerce, and Persian artisans found new markets for their products across the wider world. Yet scholars remain divided about how much these international connections ultimately strengthened the Safavid state. Some researchers argue that reliance on silk exports made the economy vulnerable to fluctuations in global demand. Others suggest that the increased flow of silver from European trade helped stabilize Persian markets for a time. The truth likely involved both opportunity and risk. You travel south to a Persian Gulf port where ships from India, Arabia, and Europe anchor in the harbour. Dock workers unload cargo while merchants examine goods arriving from distant lands, spices from India, textiles from Southeast Asia, metal goods from European workshops. In return, Persian silk carpets and precious metals travel outward across the oceans. These maritime connections represent a new chapter in Persia's long history as a crossroads of civilizations. For centuries, the Silk Roads had connected Persia primarily through overland trade across Central Asia. Now sea routes begin playing an increasingly important role. European navigators and merchants compete with older trading networks that had once been dominated by Middle Eastern and Central Asian merchants. As you watch ships leaving the harbour at sunrise, it becomes clear that Persia is now part of a truly global system of exchange. Yet these expanding connections also introduce new political complications. European powers often seek commercial privileges within foreign lands. They establish trading posts and negotiate agreements that sometimes bring them into conflict with local rulers. Historians continue discussing how Safavid leaders balance the benefits of foreign trade with the risks of growing European influence. Some rulers welcomed European merchants as useful economic partners. Others remained cautious, wary of foreign ambitions in the region. Meanwhile, the Safavid Empire must also maintain its position between powerful neighbours. To the west, the Ottoman Empire continues controlling large territories across Anatolia and the Middle East. To the east, the Mughal Empire rules much of the Indian subcontinent. These neighbouring powers are both rivals and trading partners. Diplomats travel between courts carrying letters, gifts and proposals designed to maintain delicate political relationships. You stand inside a Safavid palace, where envoys from different regions gather during a diplomatic reception. Ottoman representatives present gifts of fine textiles. Indian ambassadors bring precious stones and carved ivory. European travellers observe the ceremonies, carefully recording their impressions in journals that will later introduce Persia to readers across distant lands. Despite these impressive connections, the Safavid Empire gradually begins facing internal challenges. Maintaining strong central authority over tribal groups proves difficult. Economic pressures increase as global trade patterns shift. Some historians argue that the Safavid military system, which relied heavily on tribal warriors during earlier centuries, struggled to adapt to changing political conditions. Others emphasize the complex administrative burdens involved in governing such a large and diverse empire. Whatever the causes, the Safavid state slowly weakens during the late 17th and early 18th centuries. Yet the cultural achievements of the Safavid era continue, leaving a lasting legacy. Persian art, architecture and literature flourish. The Shiite religious identity of Iran becomes firmly established, and Persia remains an important crossroads connecting Asia, the Middle East and Europe. As night falls, along the Persian Gulf coast, ships continue arriving and departing beneath the moonlit sky. Merchants still trade silk and spices. Diplomats still carry messages between courts. Persia remains deeply connected to the wider world, but new challenges are approaching. The Safavid Empire, once powerful and stable, is beginning to show signs of decline, and soon a series of dramatic events will reshape the political future of Persia once again. The ships that once filled the Persian Gulf with silk and spices continue sailing beneath the same bright sun, but the political world of Persia is beginning to shift once again. The Safavid Empire, which had ruled for more than 2 centuries, slowly weakens during the early 18th century. The magnificent mosques of Isfahan still shine beneath blue-tile domes, but the government that built them struggles to maintain the same strength and stability. You walk through the once thriving capital where merchants still trade in busy markets, yet conversations among travellers carry an uneasy tone. Taxes have grown difficult to collect in distant provinces. Tribal alliances that once supported the Safavid rulers become less reliable. Court politics in Isfahan grows increasingly complicated as rival factions compete for influence around the throne. One widely recognized historical fact is that in 1722 the Safavid Empire suffered a devastating blow when Afghan forces captured the capital city of Isfahan. You imagine the moment when news first spreads through the countryside that a rebel army has begun marching toward the heart of Persia. These invaders come from the eastern frontier where tribal leaders had risen against Safavid authority. Led by a commander named Mahmud Hotak, the Afghan forces advance across the plateau and eventually surround the capital. The siege of Isfahan lasts for many months. Inside the city, food becomes scarce as supplies dwindle. Residents endure great hardship while waiting for relief that never arrives. Historians still debate exactly how the Safavid state became so vulnerable at this moment. Some scholars argue that years of weak leadership had undermined the empire's ability to defend itself. Others suggest that economic difficulties and growing unrest among provincial populations weakened loyalty to the central government. Whatever the deeper causes, the result is dramatic. When the siege finally ends, the Safavid ruler surrenders. For a brief moment in history, the empire that had dominated Persia for generations collapses almost completely. You walk through the silent streets of Isfahan, imagining the shock felt by people who had grown up believing the Safavid dynasty would last forever. Yet even in moments of crisis, Persia's story rarely ends with defeat alone. Soon a new military leader rises to challenge the Afghan rulers who now occupy the capital. His name is Nader. Nader begins his career as a military commander, serving the remaining Safavid princes who still claim legitimacy across parts of Persia. He proves to be an exceptionally skilled strategist. Step by step, he rebuilds a powerful army drawn from various tribal groups across the plateau. You watch as his forces train in the open plains beyond the city walls. Cavalry units practice coordinated maneuvers, infantry drill with muskets reflecting the growing influence of gunpowder weapons in warfare. Within a few years, Nader's army begins pushing back the Afghan forces that had taken control of the country. He retakes major cities and restores a degree of stability to the region. Eventually, he crowns himself ruler, founding a new dynasty known as the Afsharid Empire. Historians often describe Nader Shah as one of the most formidable military commanders in Persian history. His campaigns extend far beyond the borders of Iran. In one famous expedition, he leads an army into northern India and captures the Mughal capital of Delhi in 1739. The campaign brings enormous wealth back to Persia, including precious jewels and treasures that later become legendary. Yet scholars remain divided about the long-term impact of Nader Shah's rule. Some historians admire his military achievements and the temporary restoration of Persian power. Others argue that his relentless campaigns and heavy taxation placed enormous strain on the population. After Nader Shah's death in 1747, the empire he built begins fragmenting almost immediately. You travel across Persia during these decades of uncertainty. Local rulers establish control over different regions. Some cities maintain stability through trade and strong leadership. Others experience periods of unrest as competing factions struggle for power. Meanwhile, new global forces are beginning influencing the political future of the region. European empires, now strengthened by expanding colonial networks, show growing interest in the Middle East and Central Asia. Russia expands southward across the Caucasus. Britain seeks influence across trade routes connecting India with the Persian Gulf. Persia finds itself caught between powerful neighbours once again. Historians often refer to this period as one of fragmentation and foreign pressure, but even during these difficult decades, Persian cultural traditions continue shaping everyday life. Poetry, scholarship, and religious practice remain strong across the country. Markets still operate in cities where traders exchange goods from across Asia. The language and memory of Persia's long past remain deeply rooted among its people. You stand on a quiet hill overlooking the plateau as the sun begins setting across the land. Empires have risen and fallen here many times. Achaemenid, Parthian, Sasanian, Safavid, Afsharid, each left its mark on the history of Persia, and now the country stands at the edge of a new era. The political world of the 19th century will bring fresh challenges, foreign ambitions, and internal reforms that slowly transform Persia into the modern nation known today as Iran. The centuries of conquest, empire, and cultural transformation slowly carry you toward a new age in Persian history. The land that once supported the Achaemenid kings, the Parthian horsemen, and the Safavid shahs now stands at the threshold of the modern world. You walk through the city of Tehran during the late 18th century. At this time, it is still a relatively modest town compared with the grand capitals of earlier dynasties. Yet its location near the mountains and the major trade routes gives it growing importance. Soon it will become the center of a new ruling dynasty. One widely recognized historical fact is that in 1796, a leader named Aga Muhammad Khan established the Qajar dynasty and declared Tehran the capital of Persia. The Qajar rulers inherit a land shaped by centuries of imperial legacy, but also by the fragmentation that followed the collapse of earlier powers. You wander through Tehran's markets where merchants sell textiles, spices, copper, goods and carpets woven in nearby villages. Camel caravans still arrive from distant regions bringing goods that connect Persia to Central Asia, the Caucasus and the Indian subcontinent. But alongside these familiar scenes, new influences are appearing. Foreign diplomats arrive from powerful European states. Russian and British envoys seek alliances and trading privileges. The world beyond Persia has changed dramatically since the days of the Safavid Empire. Europe is now entering the age of industrial expansion. New technologies, stronger armies, and global colonial networks give European powers increasing influence across Asia. Persia finds itself caught between two particularly powerful rivals, Russia to the north, Britain to the south. Historians often refer to the 19th century struggle between these powers in Central Asia and Persia as part of the Great Game. You stand in the royal court of a Qajar Shah as foreign ambassadors present gifts and diplomatic letters. Russian representatives speak of treaties and border agreements. British envoys discuss trade routes that connect Persia to India, which has become a central part of the British Empire. For Persian rulers, navigating these pressures becomes a delicate balancing act. The Qajar state must maintain independence while negotiating with powerful neighbours whose influence continues growing. Unfortunately for Persia, several conflicts during this period result in territorial losses. Wars with the expanding Russian Empire during the early 19th century lead to the loss of large areas in the Caucasus. Historians widely agree that treaties signed after these wars forced Persia to surrender regions that today include parts of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. These losses deeply affect Persian political life. You walk through the streets of Tehran, where intellectuals and officials debate how the country should respond to these new challenges. Some believe Persia must modernize its army and government institutions in order to compete with the powerful states emerging across Europe. Others worry that adopting foreign ideas too quickly could threaten traditional structures of society. This debate becomes one of the defining features of Persian politics during the 19th century. Gradually, small reforms begin appearing. New schools open where students study subjects such as science, engineering, and military strategy. Persian officials travel abroad to observe European technology and administration. Printing presses begin producing newspapers that circulate political ideas among educated readers. Historians remain divided about how effective these early reforms truly were. Some scholars argue that they laid the groundwork for later modernization efforts. Others suggest that the Qajar government struggled to implement reforms consistently due to internal resistance and limited financial resources. Yet the desire for change continues growing. You travel forward into the early 20th century when a major political movement begins transforming Persian society. In 1906, widespread protests lead to the establishment of a constitutional revolution. Citizens demand limits on royal authority and the creation of a representative assembly. For the first time in Persian history, a national parliament known as the Majlis is established. This moment represents an important step toward modern political institutions. The constitution introduces ideas about law representation and government accountability. However, the transition is not easy. Political factions compete for influence. Foreign powers continue interfering in Persian affairs, and the country faces economic challenges as it attempts to balance tradition with modernization. Yet the seeds of a new political identity have been planted. You stand outside the Majlis building in Tehran as representatives gather to debate the future of the nation. Their discussions reflect a long history of Persian political thought stretching back through centuries of empire. At the same time, they grapple with the realities of a rapidly changing global world. Persia is no longer simply the crossroads of ancient trade routes. It's becoming a modern nation-state struggling to define its place within international politics. As evening falls across the city, the lights of Tehran begin glowing against the darkening sky. The story of Persia is entering its modern chapter, and the land once known to the ancient world as Persia will soon take on a new name, Iran. The lamps of Tehran glow softly against the evening sky as the modern age continues unfolding around you. The streets of the city now carry sounds that earlier generations of Persians could scarcely have imagined. Horse-drawn carts still move through the markets, but automobiles have begun appearing along the wider roads. Telegraph wires stretch between buildings, carrying messages across great distances with remarkable speed. Persia is changing. The constitutional movement you witnessed earlier opened the door to new political ideas. yet the country continues struggling to balance reform tradition and foreign influence. One widely recognized historical fact is that in 1925 a new dynasty rose to power in Persia when a military officer named Reza Khan became ruler and founded what would become known as the Pahlavi dynasty. You walk through the capital during the years leading up to this transformation. Political instability has weakened the Qajar monarchy, and many people believe a stronger leadership is needed to modernize the country. Reza Khan begins his career as a commander in the Persian military. Over time, he gains increasing influence, eventually becoming prime minister before consolidating power and taking the throne as Reza Shah. His vision for the country focuses heavily on modernization and central authority. You stand in a government office where officials discuss plans for new railways, schools, and legal reforms. Reza Shah believes Persia must strengthen its institutions if it hopes to remain independent in a world dominated by powerful industrial nations. One of his most symbolic decisions comes in 1935, when he formally requests that foreign governments begin referring to the country by its native name, Iran. The word Iran derives from ancient linguistic roots meaning land of the Aryans, a term that had been used internally for centuries even while outsiders continue calling the country Persia. Historians often interpret this name change as part of Reza Shah's broader effort to emphasize national identity and historical continuity. He wanted the modern state to be seen not simply as a relic of ancient Persia, but as a unified nation with a long cultural heritage. Reforms during his reign reshaped many aspects of society. New roads and railways connect distant regions of the country. Modern schools and universities expand educational opportunities. Legal systems are reorganized in ways that reduce the authority of traditional courts and tribal leaders. Yet scholars remain divided about the long-term impact of these reforms. Some historians argue that Reza Shah successfully laid the foundations for a modern Iranian state capable of resisting foreign domination. Others suggest that his emphasis on centralized authority limited political freedoms and created tensions that would later resurface. As you walk through the streets of Tehran in the 1930s, you notice how quickly the city is changing. Government buildings constructed in new architectural styles stand beside older bazaars that still operate much as they had for centuries. Young students carry textbooks printed in modern schools. Workers help construct rail lines stretching across the country. At the same time, older cultural traditions remain deeply rooted in daily life. Poetry is still recited in gatherings. Religious rituals continue shaping the rhythms of communities. Families still gather in courtyards where stories of ancient Persia are remembered. Iran is becoming a modern nation without abandoning its long historical memory, but global events soon interrupt these developments. During the Second World War, the strategic location of Iran once again attracts the attention of powerful foreign governments. In 1941, British and Soviet forces occupy the country in order to secure supply routes and prevent potential alliances with hostile powers. Under pressure from these events, Reza Shah is forced to abdicate. His son Mohammad Reza Pahlavi becomes the new ruler. The younger Shah inherits a nation already undergoing rapid change. You stand outside a university campus where students debate politics, economics, and the future of their country. Some support modernization programs designed to expand industry and infrastructure. Others criticize the concentration of power within the monarchy. The decades that follow will see Iran experience rapid economic growth alongside increasing political tension. Oil revenues become a major factor in the country's economy. International alliances shape foreign policy decisions, and debates about identity, governance, and independence grow more intense. Historians continue discussing how these forces interacted to shape the Iran that emerged during the 20th century. Some emphasize the importance of modernization and economic development. Others highlight the political struggles that arose as society transformed. Yet beneath all these changes, the deep historical roots of Persian civilization remain visible. The language, the poetry, the cultural memory stretching back thousands of years. You stand at the edge of Tehran's busy streets, watching the lights of the modern city stretch toward the horizon. This land has seen empires rise and fall for millennia, and now the nation called Iran carries that ancient legacy into the modern world. The story of Persia is not something left behind in the distant past. It continues shaping the identity, culture, and politics of Iran even today. The lights of modern Tehran stretch across the valley as night settles gently over the city, Cars move steadily along wide avenues where travelers once rode horses across dusty roads. Towers of glass and concrete rise above neighborhoods where ancient bazaars still hum with the quiet rhythm of daily trade. You stand on a hill overlooking the capital of modern Iran, watching the soft glow of thousands of windows spread beneath the dark sky. And as the night deepens, the long story you have traveled through begins to settle into perspective. For thousands of years, this land has carried the memory of civilizations that shaped the course of human history. One widely recognized historical fact is that the cultural roots of modern Iran stretch back more than 2.5 millennia to the earliest Persian empires. From the Achaemenid kings who ruled vast territories across 3 continents to the Safavid rulers who defined the religious identity of the nation, each era added new layers to the story of Persia. Yet what makes this history remarkable is not only the rise and fall of powerful empires, it is the endurance of culture. You imagine the many worlds that once existed across this same landscape. The stone terraces of Persepolis glowing in the sunlight as ambassadors climbed its ceremonial stairways. The caravan routes of the Parthian age carrying silk and spices across deserts and mountains. The fire temples of the Sasanian Empire, where sacred flames burned quietly through the night. The poets of Shiraz composing verses beneath garden trees. The Safavid architects raising turquoise domes above the squares of Isfahan. Each of these moments belongs to a different century, a different dynasty, a different political world. Yet together they form a continuous cultural thread that still shapes Iran today. The Persian language remains one of the most powerful examples of this continuity. Although it has evolved through many historical stages, modern Persian still carries echoes of ancient traditions preserved through poetry, literature, and storytelling. Works such as the Shahnameh continue to be read and recited centuries after they were written. Historians often emphasize how unusual this level of cultural continuity is in world history. Many ancient civilizations disappeared entirely as their political systems collapsed. Persia, however, repeatedly transformed itself while preserving its core identity. Empires changed, religions evolved, borders shifted, but the cultural memory remained. Scholars continue debating exactly why Persian civilization proved so resilient across such long stretches of time. Some researchers point to the strength of the Persian language as a unifying cultural force. Others highlight the importance of literature and storytelling in preserving historical identity through periods of political upheaval. Still others suggest that Persia's position as a crossroads between major civilizations allowed it to absorb influences while maintaining its own traditions. Perhaps the truth lies in a combination of all these factors. You walk slowly along a quiet Tehran street where cafes remain open late into the night. Inside one small gathering, a group of students sits around a table discussing philosophy and literature. On another corner, an elderly man recites lines of poetry that listeners recognize instantly. Words written centuries ago, but still alive in everyday conversation. In moments like these, the deep past of Persia does not feel distant at all. It feels present. The ancient ideals of justice and wisdom once praised by Persian kings still appear in modern debates about law and society. The stories of heroes and rulers told by poets continue shaping the imagination of new generations. The religious traditions established centuries ago still influence cultural life and political thought. Iran today exists within a complex modern world of international politics, technology, and global culture. Yet beneath the surface of that modern nation lives a historical legacy, stretching back through empires, conquests, and transformations that few societies on Earth can match. You stand once more on the hillside overlooking the city. The wind moves gently through the night air, carrying distant sounds of traffic and quiet conversation. And as you reflect on the journey across thousands of years, the story of Persia begins to settle into a calmer rhythm. Empires rose and fell. Armies marched across deserts and mountains. Cities burned and were rebuilt again. But the culture endured. The language endured. The memory endured. Now the lights of modern Iran shine beneath the same sky that once looked down on Cyrus Darius Ferdowsi and countless others whose lives shaped the story you have just travelled through. So as the night grows quieter and the city slowly prepares for sleep, you let the long history of Persia fade gently into the background. The mountains stand quietly beyond the horizon. The stars drift slowly across the sky, and the story of this ancient land stretching from the deep past into the present finally comes to rest. Word count 1115. Now the journey through history softens into a calm ending. The voices of kings, poets, and travellers slowly grow quiet. You imagine the ancient caravan roads resting beneath the moonlight, the gardens of Isfahan silent beneath their domes, the ruins of Persepolis standing peacefully beneath the stars. Across thousands of years, countless lives move through these lands. Farmers planting fields beside mountain streams, merchants guiding caravans across deserts, scholars studying beneath lantern light, poets whispering verses that would travel across centuries, all of them part of the long story of Persia. Now the world grows still. The cities fade into quiet shadows, the ancient roads disappear into darkness, and the long history of this land drifts gently into the calm of night. Rest peacefully now, knowing that the story continues carried forward by the people who live in this land today. End of script. Sweet dreams.